Against the ice, survival at the edge of the world. The thermometer outside the Resolute Bay weather station read -47 degrees Fahrenheit when Dr. Sarah Chen first noticed the unusual cloud formations gathering on the northwestern horizon. As the senior meteorologist for Environment and Climate Change Canada's Arctic Weather Monitoring Program, she had witnessed countless polar storms during her 8 years stationed in this remote corner of Nunavut. But something about these particular clouds troubled her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. The formations moved with an unnatural swiftness across the frozen landscape, their dark undersides pregnant with the promise of violence that only the Arctic could deliver. Sarah pressed her gloved hand against the triple-paned observation window of the weather station, feeling the cold seep through even the advanced insulation that kept their small outpost habitable in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Behind her, the constant hum of monitoring equipment provided a technological heartbeat in the vast silence of the polar wilderness. Banks of computers tracked wind patterns, atmospheric pressure, temperature fluctuations, and electromagnetic disturbances across a region spanning thousands of square miles of frozen ocean, tundra, and ice-covered islands that comprised Canada's high Arctic archipelago. "Systems are showing some unusual electromagnetic interference," called out Dr. Marcus Webb, her research partner and the station's communications specialist, from his position at the radio console. Marcus had been working alongside Sarah for 3 years, having transferred from the University of British Columbia's Department of Atmospheric Sciences after completing his doctorate in polar meteorology. His expertise in radio wave propagation and satellite communications had proven invaluable in maintaining contact with the outside world from their isolated position at 74 degrees north latitude. Sarah turned from the window, her breath forming small clouds in the chilled air, despite the heating system running at maximum capacity. The weather station, designated as Research Station Echo 7 by the Canadian government, had been constructed in 1987 using state-of-the-art cold weather engineering principles. The main building consisted of a central hub containing the meteorological equipment, communications gear, and living quarters, with 3 smaller pods connected by enclosed walkways that housed the generator room, emergency supplies, and backup communications equipment. "What kind of interference?" Sarah asked, moving to examine the readouts on Marcus's equipment. The radio console displayed a complex array of signal strength indicators, frequency analyzers, and atmospheric disturbance monitors that tracked everything from solar radiation to ionospheric fluctuations. As she studied the data, her concern deepened. The electromagnetic signatures were unlike anything she had encountered in her years of polar research. "It's affecting multiple frequency bands simultaneously," Marcus explained, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as he pulled up additional data streams. "VHF, UHF, and even some of our satellite uplinks are experiencing intermittent signal degradation. The pattern doesn't match any known solar storm activity or aurora-related interference." Dr. Sarah Chen had not always been drawn to the extremes of Earth's climate systems. Born and raised in Vancouver, British Columbia, she had initially pursued atmospheric science as an undergraduate at the University of Toronto with the intention of studying urban air quality and pollution patterns. Her interest in polar meteorology had been sparked during a summer research opportunity at the university's Arctic Research Station on Axel Heiberg Island, where she experienced firsthand the raw power and beauty of the polar environment. The experience had transformed her understanding of Earth's climate systems and led her to pursue graduate studies focused specifically on Arctic weather patterns and their global implications. Her doctoral dissertation on the relationship between Arctic atmospheric conditions and temperate zone weather systems had earned recognition from the international meteorological community and secured her position at Research Station Echo 7. Marcus Webb's path to the Arctic had been quite different. Growing up in rural Manitoba, he had developed an early fascination with radio communications and amateur radio operation. His childhood home, located on his family's grain farm, sat under vast skies that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, providing ideal conditions for radio wave propagation experiments. During long winter evenings, young Marcus would spend hours in his makeshift radio shack, a converted shed behind the family farmhouse, making contact with operators around the world and studying the effects of atmospheric conditions on radio signal transmission. This passion for radio science had guided his educational choices, leading him through electrical engineering studies at the University of Manitoba, and eventually to specialized graduate work in atmospheric physics and electromagnetic wave propagation. His expertise in maintaining reliable communications in extreme environments had made him an invaluable member of the Arctic research community. "Sarah, you need to see this," Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of urgency that immediately commanded her attention. On his primary monitoring screen, a real-time satellite image showed the storm system she had observed earlier. But now the full scope of its size and intensity was visible. The storm stretched across nearly 200 miles of the Arctic Ocean, its spiral structure indicating a level of organization and power that defied the typical weather patterns for this region and time of year. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered, studying the image with growing alarm. "Storms of this magnitude don't form in the Arctic basin during January. The temperature differentials aren't sufficient to sustain that level of atmospheric organization." Yet the evidence was undeniable. The satellite data showed wind speeds at the storm's center exceeding 120 miles per hour, with sustained winds throughout the system measuring between 70 and 90 miles per hour. The storm's movement pattern indicated it was tracking directly toward their position, with estimated arrival within the next 18 to 24 hours. Sarah immediately began initiating the station's severe weather protocols, a series of procedures developed through decades of Arctic research experience and refined through unfortunate encounters with the brutal realities of polar survival. The first priority was ensuring all critical systems had backup power and that emergency supplies were readily accessible. The second was establishing contact with their support base in Iqaluit and alerting other research stations and communities in the storm's projected path. "Marcus, try to reach Operations Center Iqaluit on the primary communications link," Sarah instructed while she began securing sensitive equipment and checking the integrity of their food and water supplies. "We need to report this storm system and coordinate with other stations in the region." Marcus worked methodically through his communications checklist, attempting contact on multiple frequency bands and communication protocols. The radio crackled with static and interference as he adjusted settings and tried various approaches, but each attempt met with the same result: silence. The electromagnetic interference that had initially appeared as a minor anomaly was now effectively isolating research station Echo 7 from the outside world. "No response on any channel," Marcus reported after 30 minutes of increasingly frustrated attempts. "The interference is getting worse, and I'm starting to see equipment malfunctions in our primary radio systems. Whatever's causing this electromagnetic disruption is intensifying as the storm approaches." The implications of their communication failure were severe. Research Station Echo 7 was located approximately 450 miles from the nearest permanent settlement, with the closest human presence being the small Inuit community of Grise Fjord, roughly 200 miles to the southeast. In normal circumstances, their daily communication schedule with Operations Center Iqaluit provided a crucial safety net, allowing authorities to monitor their status and coordinate assistance if needed. Dr. Elena Kozlov, The station's third team member and a specialist in polar biology and wildlife behavior entered the main operations room from the research laboratory where she had been analyzing tissue samples collected during recent ecological surveys. Elena, originally from Russia, had spent the previous 12 years studying Arctic ecosystem dynamics and the impacts of climate change on polar wildlife populations. Her work at Research Station Echo 7 focused on documenting changes in animal migration patterns and population distributions in response to shifting environmental conditions. "The atmospheric pressure is dropping faster than I've ever recorded," Elena announced, consulting the tablet device she used to monitor environmental conditions relevant to her biological research. "The local wildlife is exhibiting highly unusual behavioral patterns. The Arctic foxes that normally visit our station have completely disappeared, and I observed a group of caribou moving south in what appeared to be panic-driven flight behavior." Elena Kozlov's expertise in animal behavior had been developed through extensive fieldwork in some of the world's most challenging environments. After completing her education at Moscow State University with degrees in zoology and environmental science, she had spent several years conducting research in Siberia's Yamal Peninsula, studying the effects of industrial development on reindeer populations and traditional herding practices. This work had brought her to the attention of international Arctic research organizations and eventually led to her position with the Canadian Arctic Research Program. Her ability to interpret animal behavior as an indicator of environmental conditions had proven invaluable during her time at Research Station Echo 7. The Arctic wildlife had evolved over millennia to detect and respond to subtle environmental changes that often preceded dangerous weather conditions by hours or even days. Elena had learned to read these natural warning signs and integrate them with meteorological data to provide more accurate assessments of developing threats. "The animals are telling us something our instruments might be missing," Elena continued, moving to examine the meteorological readouts alongside Sarah and Marcus. "In my experience, when multiple species exhibit simultaneous escape behaviors, it indicates environmental conditions beyond normal storm activity." Sarah studied the atmospheric pressure readings Elena had referenced, and her concern deepened further. The barometric pressure was indeed falling at an unprecedented rate, dropping nearly 2 inches of mercury in the past 6 hours. Such rapid pressure changes typically indicated the approach of extremely violent weather systems, but the speed and magnitude of the change suggested something far beyond normal Arctic storm activity. "We need to implement full emergency protocols immediately," Sarah decided, her training and experience guiding her decision-making process despite the unprecedented nature of the developing situation. "Elena, secure all research materials and ensure the laboratory systems are properly shut down." Marcus continued trying to establish contact with the outside world, but also begin preparing our emergency communication equipment. The emergency communication equipment consisted of a battery-powered high-frequency radio system designed to operate independently of the station's main power grid, along with emergency beacons that could transmit distress signals via satellite relay. These backup systems had been tested regularly, but never used in actual emergency conditions during Sarah's tenure at the station. As the 3 researchers worked to prepare for the approaching storm, the environmental conditions outside Research Station Echo 7 continued to deteriorate with alarming rapidity. The wind, which had been relatively calm earlier in the day, began to increase steadily, producing an ominous howling sound as it interacted with the station's external structures and equipment. The temperature, already brutally cold at -47 degrees, began dropping further as the storm system's influence reached their location. Through the observation windows, they could see the approaching storm as a dark wall of swirling snow and ice stretching across the horizon. The visibility, which had been several miles earlier in the day allowing them to see distant landmarks across the frozen landscape, was rapidly decreasing as wind-driven snow began to fill the air around the station. Dr. Sarah Chen had experienced severe Arctic storms before, but something about this developing weather system felt fundamentally different. The speed of its approach, the intensity of the pressure changes, and the complete electromagnetic interference it was producing suggested they were facing a meteorological event of extraordinary magnitude. Her training had prepared her for severe weather, equipment failures, and communication problems. But the combination of all three factors occurring simultaneously presented a survival challenge unlike anything she had previously encountered. External wind speed has reached 68 miles per hour and climbing, Marcus reported from his monitoring station, his voice carrying strain as he worked to maintain control over increasingly erratic equipment. The anemometer is starting to give inconsistent readings, and I'm concerned about instrument failure in these conditions. The wind speed readings were approaching the threshold where the station's external structures might begin to experience stress beyond their design parameters. Research Station Echo 7 had been constructed to withstand extreme Arctic conditions, including winds up to 100 miles per hour and temperatures as low as -60 degrees Fahrenheit. But the combination of high winds, rapidly changing atmospheric pressure, and electromagnetic interference was creating conditions that challenged even the most robust engineering specifications. Elena had completed her laboratory shutdown procedures and was now working to secure the station's research materials and biological samples, many of which represented months or years of careful scientific work. The value of this research data extended far beyond the immediate scientific community, as it contributed to global understanding of climate change impacts and Arctic ecosystem dynamics. Losing this information would represent not only a personal and professional setback for the research team, but also a significant loss for the broader scientific understanding of polar environmental systems. "I'm detecting structural vibrations in the main building," Elena reported, pausing in her work to assess the situation. "The wind loading is causing the entire station to flex in ways I haven't experienced before." The structural vibrations Elena had noticed were indeed a cause for serious concern. Research Station Echo 7 had been designed with flexibility to accommodate the thermal expansion and contraction cycles that characterized Arctic construction, but the building was now experiencing dynamic loading from wind forces that exceeded normal design parameters. The combination of high sustained winds and turbulent gusts was creating a resonance effect that could potentially lead to structural failure if conditions continued to intensify. Sarah made the difficult decision to activate the station's emergency beacon system, even though they had not yet completely lost the ability to maintain their position at the research station. The beacon would transmit a distress signal indicating their location and the nature of their emergency. But given the electromagnetic interference they were experiencing, there was no guarantee the signal would reach monitoring stations or rescue coordination centers. "Activating emergency beacon transmission," Sarah announced, entering the appropriate codes into the beacon control system. "Even if our regular communications are compromised, this should give rescue authorities our location and status information." The emergency beacon system utilized a different frequency band and transmission protocol than their regular communication equipment, offering some hope that the signal might penetrate the electromagnetic interference that was disrupting their other systems. However, the effectiveness of the beacon would depend entirely on atmospheric conditions and the ability of distant monitoring stations to receive and process the emergency transmission. As evening approached, the storm reached Research Station Echo 7 with a fury that exceeded even Sarah's most pessimistic projections. The wind reached sustained speeds of over 100 miles per hour, with gusts measuring significantly higher before the external anemometer was torn from its mounting and disappeared into the swirling chaos of wind-driven snow and ice. The sound of the wind became a constant roar that made normal conversation difficult, even inside the insulated main building. The electromagnetic interference that had initially affected their communications equipment began to impact other electronic systems throughout the station. Computer monitors flickered and displayed erratic readings. Heating system controls responded inconsistently to input commands, and even battery-powered devices experienced unusual behavior that suggested the electromagnetic environment around the station had become severely disrupted. "We're losing heating system efficiency," Marcus reported, his voice raised to be heard over the increasing noise of the storm. "The control circuits are malfunctioning, and I can't maintain consistent temperature regulation." The heating system failure represented a potentially life-threatening development. Research Station Echo 7 depended entirely on its internal heating systems to maintain habitable temperatures in an environment where exposure to the outside conditions would result in death within minutes. The station's insulation could slow heat loss, but without active heating, the internal temperature would gradually drop to match the external environment. Sarah quickly assessed their options for alternative heating sources. The station was equipped with several emergency heating devices, including portable propane heaters and a wood-burning stove that had been installed as a backup system. However, these alternative heating sources had limited fuel supplies and were not designed to heat the entire station complex for extended periods. "We need to consolidate into the main operations room and seal off the other sections of the station," Sarah decided, recognizing that their survival might depend on reducing the volume of space they needed to heat. "Bring essential supplies and emergency equipment into this area, and we'll focus our heating resources here." Elena and Marcus began implementing Sarah's consolidation plan, gathering critical supplies including food, water, medical equipment, and emergency tools into the main operations room. The process was complicated by the increasingly violent motion of the building as wind forces continued to stress the structure beyond its normal operating parameters. The decision to consolidate into a smaller area was based on fundamental principles of cold weather survival that Sarah had learned during her Arctic training. In extreme conditions, reducing the volume of space requiring heating could mean the difference between survival and death. By sealing off unused areas of the station and concentrating their heating resources, they could extend their survival time even if primary heating systems continued to malfunction. As they worked to create their survival refuge within the research station, the external conditions continued to deteriorate beyond anything in their collective experience. The wind-driven snow had reduced visibility to zero, creating complete whiteout conditions that extended in all directions from the station. The combination of high winds, blowing snow, and extreme cold created what Arctic survival experts classify as a condition black environment, conditions so severe that survival outside shelter becomes impossible within minutes. Through brief gaps in the storm-driven snow, they occasionally caught glimpses of the transformed landscape around Research Station Echo 7. The familiar landmarks that had defined their environment for months or years had been completely obscured by the storm, creating a disorienting wilderness of swirling white that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. The research equipment and structures that normally dotted the area around the station had either been buried under accumulating snow or damaged by the extreme wind conditions. "The backup generator has automatically engaged," Marcus announced, monitoring the station's power systems from his consolidated position in the main operations room. Primary power distribution is experiencing intermittent failures, but we still have electricity for essential systems. The backup generator represented their lifeline for maintaining critical systems, including minimal heating, emergency lighting, and communication equipment. However, the generator's fuel supply was limited, designed to provide power for several days under normal emergency conditions, rather than the extended severe weather event they were now experiencing. Dr. Elena Kozlov drew upon her extensive experience with extreme weather survival to assess their situation objectively. During her years of research in remote locations, she had encountered dangerous weather conditions on multiple occasions and had developed a practical understanding of the factors that determined survival outcomes in such circumstances. We have sufficient food and water for approximately 1 week if we implement strict rationing, Elena calculated, reviewing their consolidated supplies. The critical factors will be maintaining heating and preserving battery power for emergency communications. Sarah appreciated Elena's methodical approach to their survival planning. In extreme situations, emotional responses and panic could lead to poor decision-making that compromised survival chances. By maintaining focus on practical considerations and available resources, they could maximize their chances of surviving until the storm passed or rescue operations could reach their location. The research station's food supplies had been designed to support 3 people for extended periods, reflecting the reality that weather conditions or mechanical problems could prevent scheduled resupply operations for weeks or even months. Their emergency supplies included high-calorie dried foods, canned goods, and specialized cold weather rations that provided essential nutrients while requiring minimal preparation. Water was less of a concern due to the abundance of snow and ice surrounding the station, but the energy cost of melting snow for drinking water represented an additional drain on their limited fuel resources. Each gallon of water produced from melted snow required significant energy input, creating a balance between hydration needs and fuel conservation that would become increasingly critical if their situation persisted. As the first night of the storm progressed, the 3 researchers settled into a routine designed to conserve energy and maintain morale while monitoring their situation for any changes that might indicate improvement or further deterioration. They established watch schedules that ensured continuous monitoring of critical systems while allowing each person to rest and maintain their physical and mental condition. The psychological challenges of their situation were as significant as the physical dangers. Research Station Echo 7 had transformed from a familiar workplace into a survival shelter surrounded by potentially lethal environmental conditions. The complete isolation from outside contact, combined with the uncertainty about the storm's duration and intensity, created stress factors that could significantly impact their decision-making abilities and survival chances. Dr. Marcus Webb found himself drawing upon experiences from his childhood on the Manitoba farm, where severe winter storms had occasionally isolated his family for days at a time. Those experiences had taught him the importance of maintaining routine and purposeful activity during extended periods of confinement, lessons that proved valuable in their current circumstances. I'm going to continue monitoring communications channels in case the electromagnetic interference decreases, Marcus announced during the early hours of their first night in survival mode. Even if we can't transmit effectively, we might be able to receive signals that would give us information about conditions in other areas. The possibility of receiving outside communications, even if they couldn't transmit responses, offered hope for gathering information about the storm's extent and duration. Weather information from other stations or aircraft might help them better understand their situation and plan accordingly. Throughout the night, the storm's intensity remained at levels that challenged the station's structural integrity. The building continued to flex and vibrate under wind loading, producing sounds and sensations that made sleep difficult despite their exhaustion. Each particularly strong gust would cause the entire structure to shudder, reminding them of their vulnerability in the face of the Arctic's raw power. Dr. Sarah Chen found herself reflecting on the chain of decisions and circumstances that had brought them to this situation. Her career in Arctic research had always involved calculated risks, accepting the inherent dangers of working in remote and challenging environments in exchange for the opportunity to advance scientific understanding of Earth's climate systems. She had never imagined, however, facing a survival situation of this magnitude. The second day of the storm brought no improvement in conditions outside Research Station Echo 7. If anything, the wind speeds appeared to have increased further during the night, and the electromagnetic interference continued to prevent any communication with the outside world. Their emergency beacon continued to transmit, but without confirmation that the signal was being received, they had no way of knowing whether rescue authorities were aware of their situation. Battery levels on our emergency communication equipment are starting to decline, Marcus reported during their morning situation assessment. We need to implement power conservation measures to extend our communication capabilities. The battery power situation represented a critical resource management challenge. Their emergency communications equipment offered their only hope of contacting rescue authorities once the electromagnetic interference subsided, but the batteries had limited capacity and could not be recharged with their current power generation capabilities. Sarah made the difficult decision to implement strict power conservation protocols, operating emergency communication equipment for only brief periods each hour to monitor for changes in the electromagnetic environment while preserving battery capacity for emergency transmissions if conditions improved. Elena continued her observations of environmental conditions outside the station, noting that the storm showed no signs of weakening after more than 24 hours of sustained high winds and heavy snow. The accumulated snow around the station had begun to affect air circulation around their building, potentially creating additional challenges for their heating and ventilation systems. Snow accumulation is approaching the level of our windows, Elena observed, peering through the small sections of window glass that remained clear of ice and frost. If this continues, we may lose our ability to observe external conditions and could experience problems with air intake for our heating system. The snow accumulation Elena had identified represented both immediate and long-term threats to their survival. In the short term, blocked air intakes could cause their heating system to malfunction or shut down entirely. In the long term, if snow levels continued to rise, they might find themselves effectively buried within their research station, unable to exit even if weather conditions improved. Sarah recognized the need to address the snow accumulation problem before it became critical, but venturing outside the station in current conditions would be extremely dangerous. Arctic survival protocols generally prohibited outside activity during severe weather except in life-threatening emergencies, as exposure to the combination of high winds, blowing snow, and extreme cold could result in death within minutes. We need to prepare contingency plans for dealing with blocked ventilation if the snow accumulation continues, Sarah decided. That might mean clearing air intakes from inside the building or creating alternative ventilation pathways. The ventilation problem highlighted the complex, interconnected nature of survival challenges in extreme environments. A single factor like snow accumulation could cascade into multiple system failures that compromised their ability to maintain habitable conditions within the station. Marcus had been working methodically through different frequency bands and communication protocols, seeking any gap in the electromagnetic interference that might allow contact with the outside world. His efforts had been largely unsuccessful, but he had detected occasional brief moments when signal quality improved slightly, suggesting that the interference might not be completely uniform across all frequencies and time periods. "I'm detecting some variation in the interference patterns," Marcus reported. "There might be brief windows where communication could be possible, but they're unpredictable and very short duration." The possibility of intermittent communication windows offered hope, but also created additional stress, as they needed to remain constantly prepared to take advantage of any opportunity to contact rescue authorities. Each potential communication window represented a chance to provide their location and status to the outside world, but also consumed precious battery power if the attempts proved unsuccessful. As the second day progressed, the researchers began to confront the reality that their situation might persist for an extended period. The storm showed no signs of weakening, their communication with the outside world remained severed, and their resource consumption was proceeding according to projections that would exhaust critical supplies within days rather than weeks. Dr. Elena Kozlov suggested implementing additional conservation measures based on her experience with extended field research in remote locations. Her background included situations where research teams had been forced to extend supply usage far beyond originally planned durations due to weather delays or logistical problems. "We should reduce our caloric intake to extend food supplies and implement strict water rationing," Elena recommended. "These measures will be uncomfortable, but could significantly extend our survival time if the storm persists beyond our initial projections." The rationing measures Elena proposed were based on established survival protocols that balanced the need to maintain physical and mental capabilities against the necessity of conserving limited resources. Reducing caloric intake would slow their metabolism and decrease their body heat generation, but it would also extend their food supplies and reduce their overall energy requirements. Sarah approved the implementation of rationing protocols, recognizing that their situation required difficult decisions that prioritized long-term survival over short-term comfort. Each person would receive measured portions of food and water at designated times, with strict accounting to ensure fair distribution and maximum utilization of available supplies. The psychological impact of rationing was significant, as it represented a formal acknowledgement that their situation had moved beyond temporary inconvenience into genuine survival circumstances. The researchers had transitioned from colleagues working together on scientific projects to survival partners whose lives depended on their collective ability to manage resources and maintain morale under increasingly challenging conditions. During the afternoon of their second day in survival mode, Marcus detected the strongest communication signal since the storm had begun. The electromagnetic interference decreased significantly for approximately 3 minutes, providing a window of opportunity for emergency transmission. "I have a clear channel on the emergency frequency," Marcus announced, quickly initiating transmission protocols. "Emergency, emergency, emergency. This is Research Station Echo 7 reporting severe weather emergency. 3 personnel trapped by extreme storm conditions. Coordinates 74 degrees, 58 minutes north, 94 degrees, 12 minutes west. Communications severely impaired. Require immediate assistance. Repeat, Research Station Echo 7 emergency transmission." The transmission represented their first successful contact with the outside world since the storm had begun, but they had no way of knowing whether the signal had been received by monitoring stations or rescue authorities. The communication window closed as suddenly as it had opened, with electromagnetic interference returning to levels that prevented any further transmission attempts. Despite the uncertainty about whether their emergency transmission had been received, the brief communication success provided a significant psychological boost for the research team. The knowledge that they had been able to transmit their location and situation, even briefly, offered hope that rescue authorities might now be aware of their circumstances and working to coordinate assistance. Even if that transmission was received, rescue operations would be impossible in current weather conditions, Sarah reminded her colleagues, maintaining realistic expectations about their situation. We need to continue our survival protocols and be prepared for extended isolation. Sarah's assessment reflected the harsh reality of Arctic rescue operations during severe weather. Even if authorities were now aware of their emergency, helicopter operations would be impossible in winds exceeding 50 miles per hour, and ground-based rescue would be extremely difficult in the whiteout conditions that surrounded Research Station Echo 7. The third day of the storm began with no improvement in external conditions, but the research team had established routines and procedures that helped them maintain control over their situation despite the ongoing challenges. Their heating system continued to function with intermittent problems. Their food and water rationing was proceeding according to plan, and their emergency communication equipment remained operational despite declining battery levels. Elena had been monitoring the behavior of their heating system and noticed patterns in the malfunctions that suggested specific components were being affected by the electromagnetic interference. Her background in engineering systems, developed through years of maintaining complex research equipment in field conditions, enabled her to implement workarounds that improved system reliability. I've been able to stabilize the heating system by manually overriding some of the electronic controls, Elena reported. It requires constant monitoring, but we can maintain more consistent temperatures with manual operation. Elena's technical solution to their heating problems demonstrated the importance of practical problem-solving skills in survival situations. Her ability to understand and modify the station's systems under emergency conditions significantly improved their chances of maintaining habitable temperatures throughout the duration of their ordeal. Marcus continued his systematic monitoring of communication channels, maintaining detailed logs of electromagnetic interference patterns and signal strength variations. His methodical approach had identified several brief periods each day when communication conditions improved slightly, though none had been as clear as the transmission window they had successfully utilized the previous day. The interference patterns suggest this phenomenon is related to the storm system itself rather than external factors like solar activity, Marcus analyzed. If the storm weakens, our communication capabilities should improve correspondingly. Marcus's analysis provided valuable insight into the relationship between their weather emergency and communication problems. Understanding that the electromagnetic interference was storm-related rather than equipment-based gave them reason to hope that communication capabilities would be restored as weather conditions improved. Dr. Sarah Chen had been carefully monitoring their resource consumption and calculating projections for various duration scenarios. Her analysis indicated that with strict rationing, they could survive for approximately 10 to 12 days before food supplies became critically low, assuming their heating and shelter remained functional. Our primary concern remains the heating system and structural integrity of the station, Sarah assessed. If either of those fails, our survival time decreases dramatically, regardless of food and water availability. Sarah's assessment highlighted the cascading nature of survival challenges in extreme environments. While they had successfully addressed immediate problems with food rationing and communication attempts, the fundamental threats posed by equipment failure and structural damage remained beyond their direct control. The station's structural integrity had become an increasing concern as the storm persisted with sustained high winds that exceeded the building's design parameters. The researchers could feel the entire structure flexing and moving with each gust, and they had begun to notice minor damage including cracked windows and loose exterior panels. As the fourth day of the storm began, conditions outside Research Station Echo 7 remained as severe as they had been since the weather system's arrival. The sustained winds, blowing snow, and extreme cold showed no signs of moderating, and weather observation through their limited window visibility suggested the storm system was maintaining its intensity over their location. Elena had been working to address the snow accumulation problem that threatened their ventilation systems. Using improvised tools and working carefully from inside the station, she had managed to create alternative air pathways that would allow their heating system to continue functioning even if primary air intakes became blocked. I've established backup ventilation that should keep our heating system operational, even with significant snow accumulation, Elena reported. It's not ideal, but it should prevent complete system failure. Elena's ventilation solution represented another example of practical problem-solving under extreme conditions. Her ability to adapt the station's systems to meet their survival needs demonstrated the importance of technical skills and creative thinking in emergency situations. Marcus had continued his communication monitoring activities and detected another brief transmission window during the early morning hours. This time, however, he was able to not only transmit their emergency status, but also receive a partial response from what appeared to be a rescue coordination center. I received confirmation that our emergency transmission was received, Marcus announced with excitement. Rescue operations are being coordinated, but weather conditions are preventing immediate response. They advised us to maintain our position and continue emergency beacon transmission. The confirmation that rescue authorities were aware of their situation and working to coordinate assistance provided enormous psychological relief for the research team. While immediate rescue remained impossible due to weather conditions, the knowledge that help was being organized gave them additional motivation to continue their survival efforts. Dr. Sarah Chen recognized that the rescue confirmation, while encouraging, meant they needed to continue their survival protocols for an indefinite period until weather conditions improved sufficiently to allow rescue operations. The confirmation also brought additional responsibility to maintain their emergency beacon transmission and be prepared to assist rescue teams once operations became possible. We need to prepare for rescue operations while continuing our survival protocols, Sarah decided. That means maintaining our emergency communications, preserving battery power for coordination with rescue teams, and ensuring we can provide assistance once rescue operations begin. The preparation for rescue operations required balancing their current survival needs against the resources they would need to support rescue coordination efforts. They needed to preserve communication equipment battery power while maintaining their emergency beacon transmission, and they needed to plan for the possibility that rescue operations might require their assistance or specific actions on their part. As the storm entered its fifth day, the researchers had settled into survival routines that maximized their chances of maintaining their health and morale while conserving critical resources. Their food rationing was proceeding successfully. Their improvised heating system modifications were maintaining habitable temperatures, and their emergency communication efforts had established contact with rescue authorities. Elena had been observing subtle changes in the storm's characteristics that suggested the weather system might finally be beginning to weaken. The constant roar of wind that had persisted for days seemed slightly less intense, and the building's structural vibrations had decreased marginally. I think we might be seeing the first signs that the storm is beginning to lose intensity, Elena observed cautiously. The wind patterns seem less chaotic, and the pressure readings have stabilized somewhat. Elena's observations provided the first hope that their ordeal might be approaching its conclusion. However, Arctic storms could persist for extended periods, and even a weakening storm could maintain dangerous conditions for days before improving sufficiently to allow rescue operations. Marcus had been monitoring communication channels continuously and detected increasing periods when electromagnetic interference decreased to levels that allowed limited communication. These windows were becoming more frequent and longer in duration, supporting Eleanor's assessment that the storm might be beginning to weaken. Communication windows are becoming more predictable, Marcus reported. I should be able to maintain more regular contact with rescue coordination centers as conditions continue to improve. The improving communication situation represented a critical development for coordinating rescue operations once weather conditions allowed helicopter or ground-based response teams to reach Research Station Echo 7. Regular communication would enable rescue authorities to provide updated information about rescue timing and coordinate any actions required from the research team. Dr. Sarah Chen began planning for the transition from survival mode to rescue coordination, recognizing that this phase would bring its own challenges and requirements. The research team would need to assist rescue operations while maintaining their survival protocols until they could be safely evacuated from their location. We need to prepare emergency supplies for rapid evacuation and ensure our research data and equipment are secured for either evacuation or extended abandonment, Sarah decided. Rescue operations will likely have limited time on site due to weather conditions. The preparation for rescue evacuation required identifying essential personal items, critical research data, and emergency supplies that could be quickly gathered if rescue teams arrived with limited time available for evacuation operations. Arctic rescue operations typically operated under strict time constraints due to weather conditions and fuel limitations for aircraft operations. On the 6th day of the storm, conditions outside Research Station Echo 7 showed definitive signs of improvement. While still severe by normal standards, wind speeds had decreased to levels that no longer threatened the structural integrity of the research station, and visibility had improved enough to see some of the landscape features around their location. Eleanor's environmental observations confirmed that the storm was entering a weakening phase, though conditions remained far too dangerous for personnel to venture outside the station. The combination of high winds, blowing snow, and extreme cold still created life-threatening conditions for anyone exposed to the external environment. Wind speeds have dropped to approximately 40 to 50 miles per hour, with gusts to 70. Elena reported, still dangerous but no longer at the extreme levels we experienced during the peak of the storm. The decreasing wind speeds represented significant progress toward conditions that might allow rescue operations, though helicopter flights would typically require winds below 30 miles per hour for safe operations in Arctic conditions. Ground-based rescue remained extremely difficult due to snow accumulation and visibility limitations. Marcus had established regular communication contact with rescue coordination centers and received detailed information about rescue planning and timing. Multiple agencies were coordinating response efforts, including Canadian Armed Forces helicopter units, Royal Canadian Mounted Police Emergency Response Teams, and Arctic rescue specialists with specialized cold weather equipment. Rescue coordination reports that helicopter operations could be possible within 24 to 48 hours if weather trends continue, Marcus relayed. They're staging rescue teams and equipment at forward positions to minimize response time once conditions allow safe operations. The rescue timeline provided concrete goals for the research team's continued survival efforts. They needed to maintain their current situation for another 1 to 2 days, while ensuring they were prepared for rapid evacuation once rescue operations commenced. Dr. Sarah Chen felt cautious optimism about their improving situation while maintaining focus on the survival protocols that had sustained them through the most dangerous period of their ordeal. The combination of storm weakening and rescue coordination represented the best news they had received since their emergency began. But Arctic conditions could change rapidly and unexpectedly. "We're not safe until we're evacuated," Sarah reminded her colleagues. "We need to continue our current procedures and be prepared for the possibility that conditions could deteriorate again." Sarah's caution reflected the unpredictable nature of Arctic weather systems and the importance of maintaining survival discipline until rescue operations were completed. Many Arctic emergencies had involved multiple false hopes for rescue as weather conditions improved temporarily before deteriorating again. The seventh day brought dramatically improved conditions around research station Echo 7. Wind speeds had decreased to approximately 25 miles per hour, with occasional gusts. Visibility had improved to several hundred yards, and the electromagnetic interference that had disrupted their communications had decreased to manageable levels. Elena was able to observe their external environment clearly for the first time since the storm began, revealing the extent of the changes that had occurred around their research station. Snow accumulation had transformed the familiar landscape into an alien environment of drifts and wind-carved formations that bore little resemblance to their previous surroundings. "The landscape has been completely transformed," Elena observed, studying the view through their windows. "Snow drifts are 8 to 10 feet high in some areas, and all of our external research equipment has been either buried or damaged by the storm." The transformed landscape around Research Station, Echo 7, demonstrated the awesome power of the Arctic storm they had survived. The accumulation of snow and ice had essentially created a new topography around their location, burying familiar landmarks and equipment under tons of wind-driven precipitation. Marcus received confirmation from rescue coordination centers that helicopter operations had been authorized and that rescue teams were en route to their location. The estimated arrival time was approximately 4 hours, weather conditions permitting, with backup ground-based rescue teams prepared to respond if helicopter operations encountered difficulties. "Rescue helicopter is airborne and en route," Marcus announced with visible relief. "Estimated arrival in 4 hours. They're requesting that we prepare for immediate evacuation and gather only essential personal items." The confirmation that rescue operations were actively underway provided enormous relief for the research team after 7 days of survival uncertainty. However, the rescue notification also meant they needed to quickly transition from survival mode to evacuation preparation while maintaining their safety until rescue teams arrived. Dr. Sarah Chen immediately began implementing evacuation preparation procedures, coordinating with Elena and Marcus to identify essential items that could be quickly gathered while ensuring their survival systems remained operational until rescue teams arrived at Research Station Echo 7. Priority items are personal survival equipment, critical research data, and emergency supplies that rescue teams might need, Sarah directed. Everything else remains secondary to our immediate evacuation requirements. The evacuation preparation required difficult decisions about what research materials and personal belongings could be rescued versus what would need to be abandoned at the research station. The helicopter rescue would have limited cargo capacity and strict weight restrictions that prioritized personnel evacuation over equipment or materials recovery. Elena secured the most critical biological research data and samples, representing months of work that could not be replicated if lost. Her research on Arctic ecosystem changes had global implications for understanding climate change impacts, making the preservation of this data a priority despite the challenging evacuation circumstances. Marcus prepared their communication equipment for either evacuation or extended operation, ensuring that emergency systems would continue functioning for any personnel who might need to return to Research Station Echo 7 in the future. His work also included gathering critical meteorological data that documented the unprecedented storm they had survived. As the appointed rescue time approached, the research team maintained their watch for signs of approaching aircraft while ensuring their personal safety and evacuation readiness. The psychological transition from survival mode to rescue anticipation brought both relief and anxiety as they prepared to leave the shelter that had preserved their lives through the most dangerous week of their careers. The sound of approaching helicopter rotors became audible approximately 30 minutes before the estimated arrival time, providing the research team with their first concrete evidence that rescue operations had successfully reached their remote location. The distinctive sound of aircraft engines represented salvation after 7 days of complete isolation in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. Dr. Elena Kozlov was the first to spot the search and rescue helicopter through the station's observation windows, appearing as a dark speck against the grey Arctic sky as it navigated through the challenging atmospheric conditions that still persisted around Research Station Echo 7. "Helicopter in sight, approaching from the southeast," Elena announced, her voice carrying the emotional relief that all three researchers felt as their rescue finally materialized after days of uncertainty and survival challenges. The search and rescue helicopter was a Canadian Armed Forces CH-146 Griffon, specially equipped for Arctic operations, with experienced pilots trained in extreme weather flying and rescue operations in remote locations. The aircraft's crew included specialized Arctic rescue technicians with extensive experience in cold weather survival and emergency medical treatment. As the helicopter approached Research Station Echo 7, the research team could see the skill required to operate aircraft in the marginal weather conditions that still persisted around their location. Despite the improvement from the storm's peak intensity, the combination of strong winds, blowing snow, and limited visibility created challenging flying conditions that demanded exceptional pilot expertise. The helicopter crew executed a careful approach to the research station, identifying a suitable landing area that had been partially cleared of snow accumulation by the storm's wind patterns. The landing zone was located approximately 200 yards from the main station building, requiring the research team to traverse open ground in extreme cold conditions to reach the aircraft. Marcus maintained radio contact with the rescue helicopter crew, coordinating their evacuation procedures and providing information about their current status and any immediate medical needs. The communication represented their first direct contact with their rescuers and provided opportunity to coordinate the most efficient evacuation possible given the challenging environmental conditions. Rescue team advises immediate evacuation procedures, Marcus relayed to his colleagues. They have approximately 20 minutes on the ground before weather conditions may force departure. The time constraint for evacuation reflected the ongoing challenges posed by Arctic weather conditions and the fuel limitations that affected helicopter operations at extreme range from their base facilities. The rescue team needed to complete personnel evacuation and return to their staging area before weather conditions deteriorated or fuel requirements became critical. Dr. Sarah Chen led the final evacuation preparations, ensuring that each team member had essential survival gear and that their emergency equipment was properly secured for any future operations at Research Station Echo 7. The evacuation represented not only their rescue, but also the temporary abandonment of months of research work and equipment that could not be immediately recovered. Emergency gear, personal items, and critical research data only Sarah instructed as they prepared to leave the station that had sheltered them through their survival ordeal. Everything else will need to wait for future recovery operations. The departure from Research Station Echo 7 represented a complex mix of emotions for the research team. Relief at their successful survival and rescue was combined with the sadness of leaving behind their workplace and research materials, along with uncertainty about the future of their Arctic research program. Elena secured the research station systems for extended unattended operation, ensuring that critical equipment would remain protected during the indefinite period before personnel could return to assess damage and resume normal operations. Her work included shutting down non-essential systems while maintaining emergency power and communication capabilities. Marcus completed final communication procedures, updating rescue coordination centers on their successful evacuation, while ensuring that emergency systems would continue operating for any future personnel who might visit Research Station Echo 7 before normal operations could be restored. The journey from the research station to the rescue helicopter required careful movement across snow-covered terrain in extreme cold conditions. Despite the improvement from the storm's peak intensity, the external temperature remained at approximately -35 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind speeds that created dangerous wind chill factors. The rescue team included specialized Arctic rescue technicians who assisted the research team's movement across the challenging terrain between Research Station Echo 7 and the helicopter landing zone. These technicians were equipped with specialized cold weather gear and emergency medical equipment to address any problems that might arise during the evacuation process. Dr. Sarah Chen felt profound gratitude toward the rescue team members who had risked their own safety to reach Research Station Echo 7 under challenging weather conditions. The successful rescue operation represented the culmination of coordination between multiple agencies and the expertise of personnel trained specifically for Arctic emergency response. I cannot adequately express our appreciation for the risks you've taken to reach us, Sarah told the rescue team leader as they assisted the research team toward the waiting helicopter. Your professionalism and courage have literally saved our lives. The rescue team leader, Chief Warrant Officer David Thompson of the Canadian Armed Forces Search and Rescue Unit, acknowledged their thanks while maintaining focus on completing the evacuation safely and efficiently. His team had extensive experience with Arctic rescue operations, but the conditions they had encountered reaching Research Station Echo 7 challenged even their specialized capabilities. This was one of the more challenging rescue operations we've conducted in terms of weather conditions and electromagnetic interference, Chief Thompson explained as they approached the helicopter. Your emergency beacon transmission and communication discipline made a significant difference in our ability to locate and reach you. The loading process for the rescue helicopter required careful coordination to ensure proper weight distribution and secure positioning of personnel and emergency equipment. The aircraft's cargo capacity was limited, and every item brought aboard needed to be essential for either immediate survival or critical research preservation. Elena carried the biological research samples and data that represented the most irreplaceable elements of their work at Research Station Echo 7. The samples included specimens and environmental measurements that could not be replicated and had significant value for understanding Arctic ecosystem changes and climate impacts. Marcus brought essential communication equipment and meteorological data documenting the unprecedented storm they had survived. This information would be valuable for improving understanding of extreme Arctic weather systems and potentially enhancing future emergency preparedness for remote research operations. Sarah carried emergency supplies and coordination materials that would be needed for any future recovery operations at Research Station Echo 7. Her role as team leader included responsibility for ensuring continuity of their research program, despite the emergency evacuation and temporary abandonment of their facilities. The helicopter departure from Research Station Echo 7 marked the conclusion of their survival ordeal and the beginning of their return to normal life and safety. As the aircraft lifted off from the Arctic landscape, the research team could see their research station becoming smaller in the distance, surrounded by the transformed landscape created by the storm they had survived. Chief Thompson briefed the research team on the flight plan and estimated arrival time at their destination, which would be the Canadian Armed Forces base at Iqaluit, where medical evaluation and debriefing procedures would be conducted. The flight time would be approximately 2.5 hours under current weather conditions, with potential stops for refueling, depending on atmospheric conditions along their route. Dr. Elena Kozlov reflected on the 7 days of survival challenges they had overcome through cooperation, practical problem-solving, and careful resource management. Their experience demonstrated both the dangers inherent in Arctic research and the importance of emergency preparedness and survival training for personnel working in extreme environments. Our survival depended on teamwork, technical knowledge, and careful decision-making under extreme stress, Eleanor observed as they flew away from Research Station Echo 7. This experience will definitely influence how we approach emergency preparedness for future research operations. Marcus had been thinking about the technical aspects of their communication problems and the electromagnetic interference that had complicated their emergency response. His analysis of the interference patterns during the storm would contribute to improving communication protocols for future Arctic research operations. The electromagnetic interference patterns we documented could help improve emergency communication systems for remote research stations, Marcus noted. Understanding how extreme weather affects communication could save lives in future emergency situations. Dr. Sarah Chen was already considering the broader implications of their survival experience for Arctic research operations and emergency preparedness protocols. Their successful survival of unprecedented weather conditions demonstrated both the effectiveness of existing emergency procedures and areas where improvements could enhance safety for future research operations. This experience provides valuable lessons about extreme weather survival, emergency communication, and the importance of comprehensive emergency preparedness, Sarah analyzed. Our survival recommendations could help improve safety protocols for Arctic research operations throughout the international research community. The rescue helicopter flight provided the research team with their first opportunity to see the broader extent of the storm system they had survived. From their aerial perspective, they could observe the massive scale of the weather system that had affected hundreds of square miles of Arctic territory with unprecedented intensity and duration. The storm's impact extended far beyond Research Station Echo 7, affecting multiple research facilities, remote communities, and transportation routes throughout the high Arctic region. The electromagnetic interference they had experienced had disrupted communications across a vast area, complicating rescue coordination efforts for multiple emergency situations. Chief Thompson explained that their rescue had been one of several operations conducted during the storm, as the extreme weather had created emergency situations at multiple locations throughout the Arctic archipelago. The coordination of multiple simultaneous rescue operations had challenged the capabilities of Arctic emergency response systems. The storm system affected a much larger area than typical Arctic weather events, Chief Thompson noted. Your location was one of several emergency situations we were coordinating, though the electromagnetic interference made communications particularly challenging for your rescue. The broader scope of the storm's impact highlighted the unprecedented nature of the weather system they had survived. Their experience at Research Station Echo 7 represented just one example of the challenges faced by personnel and communities throughout the high Arctic during the extraordinary weather event. As the rescue helicopter approached Iqaluit, the research team could see the transition from the stark Arctic landscape they had called home to the more developed infrastructure of the territorial capital. The sight of buildings, roads, and normal human activity provided a stark contrast to their recent survival experience in one of Earth's most isolated environments. The Canadian Armed Forces base at Iqaluit maintained specialized facilities for Arctic rescue operations and emergency medical treatment, including medical personnel trained in cold weather injuries and psychological support for personnel who had experienced survival emergencies. The base represented a crucial link in the chain of emergency response capabilities that served Canada's vast Arctic territories. Dr. Elena Kozlov anticipated the medical evaluation process that would assess their physical condition after 7 days of survival stress, ration nutrition, and exposure to extreme environmental conditions. While they had successfully maintained their health during the emergency, medical evaluation would identify any issues requiring treatment and ensure their full recovery. Marcus was eager to begin analyzing the technical data they had collected during their survival experience, particularly the electromagnetic interference patterns and communication challenges that had complicated their emergency response. This information could contribute to improving emergency communication systems for future Arctic operations. Dr. Sarah Chen recognized that their survival experience would require comprehensive debriefing with multiple agencies, including Arctic research organizations, emergency response authorities, and meteorological services interested in understanding the unprecedented storm system they had encountered. Their first-hand experience would provide valuable information for improving future emergency preparedness and response capabilities. The helicopter landing at Iqaluit marked the official conclusion of their survival emergency and the beginning of their return to normal life and research activities. However, the experience had fundamentally changed their understanding of Arctic survival challenges and would influence their approach to research operations throughout their remaining careers. The medical evaluation at the Canadian Armed Forces Medical Facility confirmed that all 3 researchers had successfully maintained their health throughout their survival ordeal, despite the challenging conditions and resource limitations they had faced. Their careful rationing and resource management had prevented the nutrition and dehydration problems that often complicated extended survival situations. Dr. Elena Kozlov received clearance to begin preserving and analyzing the biological research samples she had rescued from Research Station Echo 7, ensuring that months of Arctic ecosystem research would not be lost due to their emergency evacuation. Her work would continue contributing to global understanding of climate change impacts in polar environments. Marcus began working with communication specialists to analyze the electromagnetic interference data they had documented during the storm, contributing to research that could improve emergency communication reliability for future Arctic operations. His technical expertise would help develop more robust communication systems for extreme environment applications. Dr. Sarah Chen initiated coordination with Arctic research organizations to plan the eventual return to Research Station Echo 7 and the resumption of their meteorological and environmental monitoring programs. The unprecedented weather data they had collected would contribute to improving understanding of extreme Arctic weather systems and their global climate implications. The debriefing process with emergency response authorities provided opportunities to share their survival experience and contribute to improving emergency preparedness protocols for Arctic research operations. Their successful survival demonstrated the effectiveness of existing emergency procedures while identifying areas where improvements could enhance safety for future research personnel. The media attention surrounding their survival story highlighted the challenges and importance of Arctic research, while demonstrating the expertise and dedication of emergency response personnel who risk their own safety to conduct rescue operations under extreme conditions. Their experience became an example of successful human survival and cooperation under some of Earth's most challenging environmental conditions. Chief Warrant Officer David Thompson and his rescue team received recognition for their successful rescue operation under challenging conditions, highlighting the crucial role of specialized Arctic rescue capabilities in supporting scientific research and remote community safety throughout Canada's vast Arctic territories. The long-term impact of their survival experience extended beyond the immediate research team to influence Arctic emergency preparedness protocols, communication system development, and survival training programs for personnel working in extreme environments. Their successful survival provided practical lessons that could save lives in future emergency situations. Dr. Sarah Chen, Dr. Elena Kozlov, and Dr. Marcus Webb returned to Research Station Echo 7 6 weeks after their rescue to assess damage, recover equipment, and resume their important research into Arctic climate systems and environmental changes. Their survival experience had strengthened their appreciation for the Arctic environment while demonstrating their commitment to advancing scientific understanding of polar regions. The research station had survived the unprecedented storm with minimal structural damage, though significant equipment loss and environmental changes around the facility required months of recovery work before normal operations could be fully restored. The station's robust construction and their emergency procedures had proven effective in protecting both personnel and facilities under extreme conditions. Their survival story became part of Arctic research history, contributing to emergency preparedness training and inspiring other researchers working in extreme environments around the world. The combination of technical expertise, careful planning, teamwork, and determination they had demonstrated provided a model for successful survival under challenging conditions that extended far beyond their specific experience. The meteorological data collected during their survival period contributed to advancing scientific understanding of extreme Arctic weather systems and their relationships to global climate patterns. Their first-hand experience with unprecedented weather conditions provided valuable insights that enhanced climate research and improved weather prediction capabilities for polar regions. Elena's biological research samples, preserved through their careful emergency procedures, contributed to multiple scientific publications documenting Arctic ecosystem changes and their implications for global environmental systems. Her work demonstrated the importance of maintaining research continuity even under emergency conditions and the value of emergency preparedness for protecting scientific data. Marcus's analysis of electromagnetic interference patterns during extreme weather contributed to improving communication system design for Arctic applications, enhancing emergency response capabilities for remote research operations and community safety throughout polar regions. His technical expertise helped develop more robust communication systems that could maintain operation under challenging environmental conditions. The successful rescue operation demonstrated the effectiveness of international cooperation in Arctic emergency response, as multiple agencies and organizations had coordinated resources and expertise to ensure the research team's safe recovery. The rescue highlighted the importance of specialized Arctic rescue capabilities and the dedication of emergency response personnel. Their survival experience strengthened the research team's commitment to Arctic research, while providing practical lessons in emergency preparedness, resource management, and human cooperation under extreme stress. The 7 days they had spent surviving unprecedented weather conditions at Research Station Echo 7 became a defining experience that influenced their remaining careers in polar research. Dr. Sarah Chen continued her atmospheric research with enhanced appreciation for the power and unpredictability of Arctic weather systems, contributing to improved weather prediction and climate modeling capabilities that benefit communities and research operations throughout polar regions. Her leadership during their survival emergency demonstrated the importance of training and experience in emergency decision-making. Dr. Elena Kozlov expanded her biological research to include studies of how extreme weather events affect Arctic ecosystems, using their survival experience as motivation for research that could help understand and predict environmental changes in polar regions. Her work contributed to global efforts to understand climate change impacts on Arctic wildlife and ecosystems. Dr. Marcus Webb became a leading expert in Arctic communication systems and emergency preparedness, developing improved protocols and equipment that enhanced safety for research operations and remote communities throughout polar regions. His technical expertise, proven under extreme conditions, contributed to advancing communication reliability in challenging environments. The story of their survival at Research Station Echo 7 inspired other researchers and emergency responders working in extreme environments, demonstrating that careful preparation, technical expertise, teamwork and determination could overcome even unprecedented challenges. Their experience provided practical lessons that enhanced safety and emergency preparedness throughout the international Arctic research community. Research Station Echo 7 continued its important work monitoring Arctic climate systems and environmental changes, with improved emergency systems and procedures based on lessons learned from their survival experience. The station became a model for emergency preparedness in extreme environments, contributing to safer and more effective research operations throughout polar regions. The unprecedented storm they had survived became part of meteorological records, as an example of extreme weather events that may become more common as global climate patterns continue to change. Their survival story demonstrated human resilience and the importance of scientific research in understanding and adapting to environmental changes that affect communities and ecosystems around the world. Their successful survival and rescue operation at Research Station Echo 7 represented the triumph of human cooperation, technical expertise, and determination over some of Earth's most challenging environmental conditions. The experience strengthened their commitment to Arctic research, while providing valuable lessons that enhanced safety and emergency preparedness for future research operations in extreme environments throughout the world. The next story is Bear Mauls, Police K9 During Pursuit. April 28, 2025. The morning mist clung to the dense evergreen forests surrounding Kalispell, Montana like a shroud, obscuring the jagged peaks of the Cabinet Mountains in the distance. Officer Carl Stevens adjusted his radio one final time as he stepped out of his patrol cruiser, the familiar weight of his duty belt settling against his hips. Beside him, Rex, his 4-year-old German Shepherd partner, emerged from the vehicle's specially designed K9 compartment with practiced ease, his black and tan coat gleaming despite the early hour dampness that permeated everything in the Flathead Valley this time of year. Carl had been working with Rex for 3 years now, since the dog graduated from the Montana Law Enforcement Academy's K9 program in Bozeman. They were an inseparable team, having tracked down dozens of suspects through some of the most challenging terrain in the northwestern United States. Rex had been bred specifically for police work by a specialized facility in Colorado, his bloodline tracing back to champion working dogs used by German police units. The shepherd's keen nose could detect human scent trails up to 72 hours old under optimal conditions, and his tracking abilities had led to the successful apprehension of fleeing suspects in cases ranging from domestic violence to armed robbery. This morning's pursuit had begun at 6:47 a.m. when a 911 call came in from Martha Henriksen, a 73-year-old retired schoolteacher who lived alone in a modest cabin on Forest Service Road 895, approximately 14 miles northeast of Kalispell proper. Martha had been awakened by the sound of her storage shed being forcibly entered, followed by the unmistakable noise of someone rummaging through her late husband's tool collection. When she peered through her bedroom window, she caught sight of a tall, lanky figure in dark clothing stuffing items into a military-style backpack. The suspect, later identified as 28-year-old Derek Anthony Mallinson, had been released from Montana State Prison in Deer Lodge just 6 weeks earlier after serving 18 months for burglary and assault. Mallinson stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, weighed approximately 170 pounds, and had distinctive tattoos covering both forearms, a detailed eagle on his right arm and what appeared to be barbed wire wrapped around his left bicep. His criminal record stretched back to his teenage years, with arrests for theft, drug possession, and increasingly violent crimes that had escalated from simple shoplifting to armed robbery. When Martha called 911, she provided dispatcher Jennifer Walsh with a detailed description of the suspect and mentioned that he appeared to be heading northwest from her property toward the deep wilderness areas that bordered Glacier National Park. The terrain in that direction was notoriously difficult, consisting of steep ravines, dense undergrowth, and miles of old-growth forest that had remained largely untouched by human development. It was also prime grizzly bear habitat, a fact that weighed heavily on the minds of every law enforcement officer in the region. Detective Sergeant Robert "Bobby" Martinez had been with the Flathead County Sheriff's Department for 15 years and served as the primary coordinator for high-risk pursuits in wilderness areas. Martinez, a stocky 42-year-old with graying temples and weathered hands that spoke of his earlier career as a Forest Service firefighter, understood better than most the dangers that awaited anyone venturing into the backcountry without proper preparation. He had grown up in Kalispell, spending his childhood hunting and fishing with his father along the same trails that now served as escape routes for desperate criminals. When the call came in about the burglary, Martinez immediately began coordinating a multi-agency response. He contacted the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Department to alert them of the situation, knowing that their officers had the most current information about bear activity in the area. He also reached out to the U.S. Forest Service and requested that they position personnel at key trail access points to prevent the suspect from reaching even more remote areas where a search could take weeks. Officer Stevens and Rex were among the first responders to arrive at Martha Henriksen's property. Carl parked his cruiser next to the gravel driveway and immediately began assessing the scene. Martha met them at her front door, still wearing her flannel nightgown and clutching a cup of coffee with hands that trembled slightly from both age and the morning's excitement. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and bright blue eyes that missed nothing despite her advanced years. "He took Harold's good hammer and the expensive screwdriver set," Martha explained, referring to tools that had belonged to her husband, who had passed away 3 years earlier. "I saw him clear as day when he turned toward me. Young man, but with old eyes, if you know what I mean. He looked like he'd been sleeping rough for days." Carl knelt down beside Rex and attached the dog's tracking harness, a specialized piece of equipment designed to distribute the animal's weight evenly during extended pursuits over difficult terrain. The harness was bright orange for visibility and included reflective strips, a small first aid kit, and attachment points for additional gear if needed during longer operations. Rex immediately understood what the harness meant. They were going to work. The scent trail was fresh and easy for Rex to detect. The dog's nose, containing over 300 million olfactory receptors compared to a human's 6 million, could distinguish individual scent signatures even hours after a person had passed through an area. Rex began tracking immediately, his nose close to the ground as he followed the invisible trail of skin cells, sweat, and other human emanations that Mallinson had left behind. The initial portion of the track led through relatively open terrain behind Martha's property, crossing a small meadow where the morning dew had captured and preserved scent molecules on the grass and wildflowers. Carl followed behind Rex at a distance of about 15 feet, connected to his partner by a 30-foot tracking lead that allowed the dog freedom to work while maintaining control. Behind Carl, Officer Patricia Patty Kowalski, an 8-year veteran of the department who specialized in wilderness operations, documented their progress with a handheld GPS unit and maintained radio contact with the command post. Patty was 34 years old, originally from Minnesota, and had moved to Montana specifically to work in an environment where her outdoor skills would be valuable. She stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, with auburn hair that she kept pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her equipment vest contained everything from emergency medical supplies to bear spray. She had completed extensive training in wilderness survival and had personally encountered black bears on 3 separate occasions during her law enforcement career, though she had never faced a grizzly in the field. The scent trail led them northwest from Martha's property, exactly as she had predicted, into increasingly dense forest. The terrain began to slope upward as they entered the foothills, and the undergrowth became thicker with each passing mile. Douglas fir, western larch, and ponderosa pine towered overhead, their canopy so dense that it blocked much of the morning sunlight. The forest floor was carpeted with decades of fallen needles, creating a soft, spongy surface that muffled their footsteps, but also made it difficult to spot tracks or other physical evidence of the suspect's passage. Rex's behavior indicated that the scent trail was strong and relatively fresh, probably no more than 2 hours old. The dog moved with purpose, his tail held high and his body language confident. Carl had learned to read his partner's every signal over their years together, and everything about Rex's demeanor suggested they were closing the distance on their quarry. As they climbed higher into the foothills, Officer Stevens began to feel the familiar mixture of adrenaline and apprehension that accompanied pursuit operations in bear country. The area they were entering had recorded 17 grizzly bear encounters in the previous year, including 2 incidents where bears had approached campers, and 1 case where a hiker had been followed for nearly a mile by a large male. The Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Department had issued multiple warnings about increased bear activity in the region, partly due to a poor berry crop the previous fall that had left many bears searching for alternative food sources. Grizzly bears in this part of Montana typically weighed between 400 and 600 pounds for males, with females ranging from 250 to 400 pounds. They could run up to 35 miles per hour over short distances, climb trees when younger, and had a sense of smell that was 7 times more powerful than a bloodhound's. An adult grizzly's bite force measured approximately 1,200 pounds per square inch, more than enough to crush bones, and their claws could grow up to 4 inches in length. At 8:23 a.m., approximately 90 minutes into the pursuit, Rex's behavior changed noticeably. The dog's pace slowed, and he began lifting his head periodically to test the air rather than keeping his nose continuously to the ground. Carl recognized this as a sign that they were encountering competing scents, possibly wildlife that had crossed the suspect's trail. "Rex is picking up something else," Carl radioed to Patty. "Could be deer, could be something bigger." Patty checked her GPS coordinates and noted their position on the topographical map she carried. They were now approximately 4 miles from Martha Henriksen's property, at an elevation of roughly 4,200 feet and entering an area marked on wildlife maps as prime grizzly habitat. A small creek ran parallel to their route about 200 yards to the east, providing the kind of water source that attracted both prey animals and the predators that hunted them. The forest around them had changed character as they climbed higher. The trees were older and more massive, some of the Douglas firs reaching diameters of 4 feet or more. Fallen logs created natural obstacles that required careful navigation, and the undergrowth included berry bushes that would be prime bear feeding areas once the fruit ripened later in the summer. Carl noted numerous game trails crisscrossing their path, worn smooth by decades of deer, elk, and other animals moving through the forest. Rex paused at a large fallen log that lay across their path, his nose working overtime as he processed multiple scent streams. The dog's tail dropped slightly, and his ears pricked forward in the way that indicated he was detecting something that required his full attention. Carl approached carefully, knowing that his partner's behavioral changes often preceded important discoveries. The log showed clear signs of recent animal activity. Deep claw marks scored the bark, and several large tufts of dark brown fur clung to the rough surface where something had rubbed against it. Carl knelt down for a closer examination and felt his stomach tighten as he realized what he was looking at. The claw marks were spaced too far apart to have been made by a black bear, and the fur was the distinctive grizzled brown color that gave grizzly bears their name. "Patty, we've got fresh grizzly sign," Carl called out, his voice carefully controlled to avoid spooking Rex or alerting any wildlife that might be in the area. "Big claw marks on this fallen log, and the fur looks recent." Patty moved up to examine the evidence while maintaining watch around them. Her training had taught her that grizzly bears were most dangerous when surprised or when defending cubs, and the thick forest around them provided countless opportunities for an unexpected encounter. She unclipped the bear spray from her belt and held it ready while scanning the trees and undergrowth for any signs of movement. The bear spray, a specialized formulation of capsaicin designed specifically for deterring bears, could shoot a concentrated stream up to 30 feet and create a temporary cloud of irritant that would discourage most bears from attacking. However, Patty knew that bear spray was not 100% effective, particularly with grizzlies that were already agitated or defending territory. The canister she carried contained enough spray for approximately 6 seconds of continuous discharge, which meant that timing and accuracy were crucial in any encounter. Rex had continued working during their examination of the claw marks, and his behavior indicated that the human's scent trail continued past the log into even denser forest ahead. The dog showed no signs of detecting the grizzly's current presence, suggesting that the bear had moved through the area sometime earlier, perhaps hours, but possibly as recently as 30 minutes. Carl made the decision to continue the pursuit while remaining on high alert for bear activity. The suspect they were tracking was a dangerous individual with a history of violence, and allowing him to escape into the vast wilderness areas beyond their current position could put civilian campers and hikers at risk. Every law enforcement officer in the region knew stories of criminals who had disappeared into the backcountry, only to emerge weeks later having committed additional crimes against unsuspecting outdoor enthusiasts. As they moved past the fallen log, the forest seemed to close in around them. The canopy overhead blocked almost all direct sunlight, creating a twilight atmosphere, even though it was now mid-morning. The temperature under the trees was noticeably cooler than it had been in the open meadow near Martha's property, and Carl could see his breath misting slightly in the humid air. Rex's tracking indicated that the suspect had begun moving more erratically once he entered the deeper forest. Instead of maintaining a straight line northwest, Mallinson appeared to be following game trails and natural pathways that wound back and forth through the trees. This behavior suggested either that he was becoming tired and taking the path of least resistance, or that he was familiar enough with the area to know the easier routes through the terrain. At 9:15 a.m., they encountered their first major obstacle. The terrain dropped away sharply into a rocky ravine that was approximately 30 feet deep and 50 feet wide. A small stream ran along the bottom, fed by snowmelt from the higher elevations. The sides of the ravine were steep and covered with loose rock and exposed tree roots that would make descent dangerous without proper equipment. Rex's nose told him that the suspect had found a way down into the ravine and crossed to the other side. The dog led them along the edge until they found a game trail that switched back down the steep slope, marked by the hoofprints of deer and elk that regularly used this route to access water. Carl tested each step carefully as they descended, knowing that a fall could injure him or Rex and potentially end their ability to continue the pursuit. The bottom of the ravine was a different world. The sound of running water echoed off the rock walls, and the air was noticeably cooler and more humid. Large boulders created numerous hiding spots, and the vegetation was different from the hillsides above, more lush and green, with ferns and moss growing in the constantly moist environment. It was while crossing the stream that Rex alerted to something that made Carl's blood run cold. The dog froze in mid-stride, his body rigid and his nose pointed upstream toward a cluster of large boulders. Rex's behavior indicated the presence of something that commanded his complete attention, and his rigid posture suggested either fear or extreme caution. Carl followed his partner's gaze and saw what had captured the dog's attention. Pressed into the soft mud beside the stream were fresh tracks, massive paw prints that could only have been made by a large grizzly bear. The tracks were so recent that water was still seeping into the depressions, indicating that the bear had passed this way within the last few minutes. Each track measured approximately 11 inches long and 7 inches wide, suggesting a bear that weighed at least 500 pounds. The claw marks extended 3 inches beyond the toe pads, and the depth of the impressions in the mud indicated an animal of enormous size and weight. More disturbing was the fact that the tracks were heading in the same direction as the human scent trail that Rex had been following. Patty joined Carl at the stream's edge and immediately recognized the implications of what they were seeing. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. "That bear is tracking the same guy we are." Carl's mind raced through the possibilities. Grizzly bears were opportunistic feeders, and while they primarily ate roots, berries, fish, and small mammals, they were also scavengers that would investigate anything that might represent a potential food source. A human moving through their territory, particularly one who might be carrying food or scented items, could definitely attract a bear's attention. The scenario was complicated by the fact that Mallinson was a fleeing suspect who might not be aware of the bear's presence. If the grizzly caught up to him first, they could be looking at a mauling or fatality that would transform their pursuit operation into a body recovery mission. On the other hand, if they encountered the bear while it was stalking the suspect, they could find themselves caught between a dangerous criminal and an even more dangerous predator. Carl made the decision to continue tracking while implementing additional safety protocols. He instructed Patty to maintain constant radio contact with the command post and to request that additional units be positioned at all possible exit points from the area. He also asked for an emergency medical helicopter to be placed on standby, knowing that any bear encounter in such remote terrain would require rapid evacuation capabilities. Rex remained focused on the human scent trail, but his behavior had changed noticeably since encountering the bear tracks. The dog moved more cautiously, frequently lifting his head to test the air and occasionally glancing back at Carl as if seeking reassurance. Carl had never seen his partner display such obvious signs of unease, and it reinforced his own growing concern about the situation they were walking into. As they climbed out of the ravine on the far side, the forest changed character once again. The trees were more widely spaced, allowing more sunlight to reach the forest floor, but the undergrowth was correspondingly thicker. Huckleberry bushes, serviceberry, and other plants that bears favored created dense patches that limited visibility to just a few yards in any direction. The human scent trail led directly through the thickest part of this vegetation, following what appeared to be a well-used game trail. Carl realized that Mallinson was either completely unaware of the danger he was in, or was deliberately using the heavy cover to avoid detection by his pursuers. Either way, the thick vegetation created perfect conditions for an ambush, either by the suspect they were tracking or by the grizzly bear that appeared to be stalking him. At 10:42 a.m., Rex suddenly stopped and raised his head, his entire body tense with alertness. The dog's ears were pricked forward, and he was staring intently into a dense thicket about 50 yards ahead of their position. Carl immediately halted and signaled Patty to freeze, knowing that his partner had detected something that required immediate attention. For several seconds, they remained motionless, listening for any sounds that might indicate what had captured Rex's attention. The forest around them was unusually quiet. No bird songs, no rustling of small animals in the undergrowth, no insects buzzing. Carl's experience told him that such silence often preceded encounters with large predators, as smaller animals sensed danger and sought cover. Then they heard it, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from deep within the thicket ahead. It was not quite a growl, but rather a vocalization that seemed to express displeasure or warning. Carl felt his heart rate spike as he recognized the sound as one that grizzly bears made when they were agitated or feeling threatened. Rex's body language had shifted from alert to genuinely frightened. The dog's tail was tucked between his legs, and he was looking back at Carl with an expression that clearly communicated his desire to retreat from whatever was ahead of them. In 3 years of partnership, Carl had never seen his confident, fearless partner display such obvious signs of fear. Patty had her bear spray ready and was slowly backing away from the thicket while maintaining visual contact with the area where they had heard the sound. Her training had taught her that the best strategy when encountering a bear was to avoid confrontation if possible. But their situation was complicated by the fact that they were in active pursuit of a dangerous suspect who might be somewhere ahead of them. The decision was made for them when they heard a human scream from somewhere beyond the thicket. It was a sound of pure terror, high-pitched and desperate, that echoed through the forest and sent chills down Carl's spine. The scream was followed immediately by a series of explosive, crashing sounds as something large moved rapidly through the heavy vegetation. "That's got to be our suspect," Carl said into his radio, "and it sounds like he's in serious trouble." Rex was now actively trying to retreat, pulling backward on his tracking lead and whining softly. The dog's instincts were telling him to flee from whatever was ahead of them, but his training and loyalty to Carl kept him from bolting. Carl knew that his partner's fear was well-founded. Dogs possess senses that could detect danger long before humans became aware of it. Another scream pierced the forest, this one closer and more prolonged. It was followed by what sounded like branches breaking and heavy bodies crashing through the undergrowth. Then came a sound that made Carl's blood freeze in his veins, the distinctive huffing and jaw-popping that grizzly bears made when they were extremely agitated and preparing to attack. "We've got a bear attack in progress," Carl radioed to the command post. "Request immediate backup and emergency medical support. GPS coordinates ... He rattled off their position while watching the thicket ahead for any signs of movement. The forest erupted in chaos as something large crashed through the vegetation toward their position. Carl could hear the sound of claws scraping against bark and the heavy breathing of a massive animal in pursuit of something that was fleeing directly toward them. He realized with growing horror that the suspect was running straight toward their position with an enraged grizzly bear in pursuit. Derek Mallinson burst out of the thicket 30 yards ahead of them, running in a desperate, stumbling gait that spoke of exhaustion and terror. His dark clothing was torn in several places, and even from a distance, Carl could see bright red blood on his left arm and shoulder. Mallinson's eyes were wide with panic, and he was looking back over his shoulder at whatever was pursuing him, rather than watching where he was running. The bear emerged from the vegetation 5 seconds later, and Carl felt his knees nearly buckle at the sight of it. The grizzly was enormous, easily 6 feet tall at the shoulder and probably weighing close to 600 pounds. Its massive head swung back and forth as it tracked the fleeing human, and its lips were pulled back to reveal teeth that seemed impossibly large and sharp. The bear's fur was dark brown, with the distinctive grizzled tips that gave the species its name, and its shoulder hump, a massive muscle that powered the animal's ability to dig and fight, was clearly visible as it moved with surprising speed through the forest. Most terrifying of all were the bear's eyes, which seemed to hold an intelligence and focus that made it clear this was not a random encounter, but a deliberate pursuit. Mallinson saw Carl and the other officers and began running directly toward them, apparently believing that law enforcement officers would provide safety from the pursuing bear. What he didn't realize was that his movement toward them was also drawing the grizzly in their direction, creating exactly the kind of dangerous situation that Carl had been dreading since they first saw the bear tracks. "Get behind us!" Carl shouted to Mallinson while drawing his service weapon, though he knew that even his .40 caliber pistol would be inadequate against such a massive animal unless he could achieve perfect shot placement. "Get down and stay down!" Rex was now barking frantically, his training warring with his instincts as he tried to process the threat bearing down on them. The dog's protective instincts toward Carl were overriding his fear, and he was positioning himself between his partner and the approaching danger despite his obvious terror. The grizzly had closed to within 20 yards when it suddenly stopped and reared up on its hind legs, standing nearly 8 feet tall as it tested the air and evaluated the new threats it was facing. Bears often stood up to get a better view of their surroundings rather than as a threatening gesture. But the sight of such a massive predator towering above them was absolutely terrifying. Carl could see every detail of the bear's anatomy, the powerful muscles rippling beneath its thick fur, the massive claws that could easily tear through human flesh, the small, intelligent eyes that seemed to be calculating its next move. The animal's breathing was visible in the cool air, and Carl could smell the wild, musky scent that emanated from its fur. For a moment that seemed to last forever. The bear remained upright, swaying slightly as it processed the scents and sounds around it. Carl could hear Patty behind him, speaking quietly into her radio as she called for backup, but her voice seemed to be coming from very far away. His entire focus was concentrated on the massive predator that was deciding whether they represented a threat, prey, or something to be avoided. The bear dropped back to all fours and took several steps toward them, its massive head lowered and its ears flattened against its skull. This body language was universally recognized as aggressive, and Carl knew that they were seconds away from an attack. He raised his pistol but hesitated to fire, knowing that a wounded grizzly was even more dangerous than an unwounded one. That hesitation saved his life, because in that moment, Rex made a decision that would change everything. The German shepherd, despite his fear and his training that taught him to obey his handler above all else, suddenly broke free from Carl's grip on the tracking lead and charged directly at the grizzly bear. Rex weighed 85 pounds and possessed the courage and protective instincts that had been bred into his bloodline for generations, but he was still just a dog facing a predator that outweighed him by more than 6 to 1. The shepherd's attack was not intended to kill or seriously injure the bear, but rather to distract it from his human partner and create an opportunity for escape. The bear's attention immediately shifted to this new threat, and it swung one massive paw at the approaching dog. Rex was fast enough to avoid the first swipe, but the bear's reach was longer than the dog had calculated. The second swipe caught Rex across his left shoulder and sent him tumbling through the air to crash against a nearby tree. Carl heard his partner yelp in pain and fear, and something inside him snapped. The bond between a K-9 officer and his dog was unlike any other relationship in law enforcement, forged through years of training, shared danger, and mutual dependence. Rex wasn't just Carl's partner. He was family, and seeing him injured by the bear triggered a protective rage that overrode all tactical considerations. "Rex!" Carl screamed and began moving toward his fallen partner without considering the danger to himself. The bear was now focused on the dog, who was struggling to get back to his feet despite what appeared to be a serious injury to his left front leg. The grizzly approached Rex with the deliberate movements of a predator that knew its prey was wounded and vulnerable. Bears were not naturally aggressive toward humans, but once they had been drawn into a confrontation, their instincts drove them to eliminate any perceived threats. Rex represented such a threat, and the bear's intention was clearly to finish what it had started. Rex managed to regain his feet, but was favoring his injured leg and moving much more slowly than usual. The dog's training and loyalty compelled him to continue trying to protect Carl, even though he was clearly outmatched and seriously injured. Rex positioned himself between the bear and his human partner, growling and baring his teeth in a display of courage that was both inspiring and heartbreaking. The bear reared up again, this time directly over Rex, and Carl knew that the next blow would be fatal for his partner. Without conscious thought, he aimed his pistol at the bear's center mass and began firing, knowing that he had to act immediately if there was any chance of saving Rex's life. Carl's first shot struck the bear in the chest, but the animal's thick hide and muscle mass absorbed the impact with minimal effect. The grizzly dropped back to all fours and spun toward this new source of pain and danger, its attention now completely focused on Carl rather than the injured dog at its feet. The bear's charge covered the 20 feet between them in less than 2 seconds, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for such a large animal. Carl managed to fire 3 more shots as the grizzly closed the distance, but the bear's momentum carried it forward even as the bullets found their mark. The impact knocked Carl backward and off his feet, his pistol flying from his hand as he hit the ground hard. The bear's massive weight pressed down on him, and he could feel the animal's hot breath on his face as it attempted to bite his head and neck. Only his quick reflexes in raising his arms to protect his face saved him from immediately fatal injuries. The bear's jaws clamped down on Carl's left forearm, and he felt the bones snap under the incredible pressure. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced, white-hot and overwhelming, but his training kept him conscious and fighting. He managed to reach the bear spray on his belt with his right hand and discharge it directly into the animal's face from point-blank range. The capsaicin spray had an immediate effect, causing the bear to release his arm and rear back with a series of explosive snorts and huffs. The animal's eyes were streaming, and it shook its massive head violently as it tried to clear the irritant from its nose and mouth. For a moment, Carl thought the spray might be enough to drive the bear away, but his relief was short-lived. Instead of retreating, the bear became even more enraged. The spray had caused pain and confusion without providing enough deterrent effect to overcome the animal's aggressive state, and it now viewed Carl as the source of its discomfort. The grizzly dropped back down and began mauling Carl's legs and torso, its claws raking across his body armor and tearing through his clothing. Carl's tactical vest absorbed some of the damage, but the bear's claws were long enough and sharp enough to penetrate the protective material in several places. He could feel blood flowing from multiple wounds, and his left leg felt like it might be broken from the bear's weight and the force of its attacks. Patty had been trying to get a clear shot with her own weapon, but the bear's movements and Carl's position made it impossible to fire without risking hitting her fellow officer. She continued spraying bear repellent whenever she had an opportunity, but the animal seemed to be beyond the point where the deterrent would be effective. Rex, despite his own injuries, was making desperate attempts to help his fallen partner. The dog was limping severely, but he managed to grab the bear's rear leg in his jaws and bite down with all his remaining strength. Rex's attack did little physical damage to the massive grizzly, but it provided enough distraction for Carl to roll away from the bear's immediate reach. The bear's response to Rex's interference was swift and devastating. The grizzly spun around and struck the German Shepherd with both front paws, the force of the blow lifting the 85-pound dog completely off the ground. Rex hit a nearby tree with a sickening thud and collapsed to the forest floor, where he lay motionless. "Rex!" Carl screamed again, trying to crawl toward his partner despite his own severe injuries. The sight of his dog lying still and apparently lifeless filled him with a grief and rage that temporarily overwhelmed the pain from his own wounds. The bear, satisfied that it had eliminated the immediate threats, began to withdraw from the area. Grizzlies rarely continued attacking once they believed the danger had passed, and the animal's instincts were telling it to leave the scene before additional threats arrived. The bear's withdrawal was slow and deliberate, frequently looking back to ensure that none of its victims were following or posing continued danger. Patty immediately moved to assist Carl, who was bleeding heavily from multiple wounds and appeared to be going into shock. His left arm was clearly broken and had deep puncture wounds from the bear's teeth. His tactical vest was shredded in several places, and his left leg was bent at an unnatural angle that suggested a serious fracture. "Officer down! Officer down!" Patty screamed into her radio. "We need immediate medical evacuation. Bear attack with multiple casualties." She provided their GPS coordinates while applying pressure to Carl's most serious wounds, knowing that blood loss was the most immediate threat to his survival. Carl was conscious but disoriented, repeatedly calling out for Rex despite Patty's attempts to keep him focused on staying awake. The loss of blood was making him weak and confused, but his primary concern remained his fallen partner rather than his own injuries. "Where's Rex?" Carl kept asking. "Is Rex okay? I need to help Rex." Patty glanced over at the motionless German Shepherd and felt her heart sink. Rex was lying on his side about 15 feet away, and she could see no signs of movement or breathing. The dog's body was twisted in a way that suggested severe internal injuries, and there was a growing pool of blood beneath his head and neck. Derek Mallinson had disappeared during the attack, apparently using the chaos to escape into the deeper forest. Patty made note of his last known direction, but knew that pursuing him was impossible, given Carl's critical condition and the continued presence of an aggressive grizzly bear in the area. The emergency medical helicopter that had been placed on standby was airborne within minutes of receiving Patty's call, but the remote location and dense forest canopy made finding a suitable landing zone extremely difficult. The pilot, Michael "Mike" Brennan, was a former military aviator with extensive experience in mountain rescues, but even he was challenged by the terrain and weather conditions. Brennan circled the area for several minutes before identifying a small clearing approximately half a mile from the attack site that was large enough to accommodate his aircraft. The helicopter's medical crew, consisting of flight nurse Sarah Chen and paramedic Tommy Rodriguez, would have to hike through the forest to reach the injured officer while carrying all necessary medical equipment. Sarah Chen was a 15-year veteran of emergency medicine who had worked in trauma centers in Los Angeles and Seattle before moving to Montana to be closer to her family. She was 38 years old, stood 5 feet 4 inches tall, and possessed the kind of calm competence that came from treating thousands of critically injured patients. Her medical bag contained everything from basic first aid supplies to advanced trauma medications, and she was qualified to perform emergency surgical procedures in the field if necessary. Tommy Rodriguez had been working as a paramedic for 8 years and specialized in wilderness rescue operations. He was 29 years old, built like a football player, and had grown up in rural Montana, hunting and fishing with his father and uncles. Tommy understood the terrain and the dangers of working in bear country, and his equipment included specialized gear for treating trauma victims in remote locations. The hike to reach Carl and Patty took the medical team 23 minutes, during which time Patty continued providing first aid while monitoring the forest around them for any signs of the bear's return. She had applied pressure bandages to Carl's most serious wounds and splinted his broken leg using emergency supplies from her pack, but his condition was deteriorating as shock and blood loss took their toll. Carl drifted in and out of consciousness during the wait for medical assistance, and his periods of awareness were marked by increasing confusion and disorientation. He continued asking about Rex and became agitated whenever anyone tried to redirect his attention to his own injuries. When Sarah and Tommy arrived at the scene, they immediately began a rapid assessment of Carl's condition, while setting up an IV line to replace lost fluids and administer pain medication. His injuries were extensive and serious: a compound fracture of the left radius and ulna, deep puncture wounds on both arms, multiple lacerations across his chest and back, and a possible fracture of the left femur. "We need to get him out of here immediately," Sarah told Tommy as she worked to stabilize Carl's arm fracture. "He's lost a lot of blood, and some of these wounds are going to need surgical repair." The process of preparing Carl for evacuation was complicated by the remote location and the continued threat of bear activity in the area. Additional law enforcement officers had begun arriving to secure the scene, but moving an injured person through dense forest while carrying medical equipment required careful coordination and significant manpower. Rex remained motionless throughout the medical team's work on Carl. Sarah checked the dog for signs of life during a brief break in treating the human patient, but found no pulse or respiratory activity. The German Shepherd's injuries were massive and unsurvivable. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and trauma to the head and neck that had apparently caused immediate death. Carl became increasingly agitated as the medical team prepared him for transport, repeatedly demanding to know about his partner's condition. The combination of pain medication and blood loss was affecting his judgment, but his emotional attachment to Rex remained the dominant factor in his mental state. "Rex is being taken care of," Sarah told him, using the kind of therapeutic communication that healthcare providers employed when dealing with traumatized patients. "Right now, we need to focus on getting you to the hospital." The transport to the helicopter landing zone required 6 officers and medical personnel working together to carry Carl's stretcher through the forest while maintaining security against possible bear encounters. The thick vegetation and uneven terrain made progress slow and difficult, but they reached the helicopter without incident. Mike Brennan had the aircraft warmed up and ready for immediate departure. The flight to Kalispell Regional Medical Center would take approximately 18 minutes, during which time Sarah and Tommy would continue monitoring Carl's vital signs and administering treatment as needed. The helicopter lifted off at 12:47 p.m., nearly 2 hours after the initial bear attack. Carl was semi-conscious during the flight, occasionally calling out for Rex, but generally unresponsive to questions about his condition or the events that had led to his injuries. Dr. Elizabeth Harper was the trauma surgeon on duty when Carl arrived at Kalispell Regional Medical Center. Dr. Harper was 41 years old, originally from Chicago, and had been working in Montana for 6 years after completing her residency at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. She was an experienced surgeon who had treated numerous outdoor recreation injuries, but bear attack victims were relatively rare even in her practice. The emergency department team was ready for Carl's arrival, having been briefed by the helicopter crew during the flight. The hospital's trauma protocol for animal attacks included immediate assessment for life-threatening injuries, aggressive fluid resuscitation, and prompt surgical intervention for major wounds that required repair. Carl's initial examination revealed the full extent of his injuries. In addition to the fractures and lacerations that had been identified at the scene, X-rays showed several cracked ribs and evidence of internal bruising that would require monitoring for possible complications. The puncture wounds on his arms showed signs of infection risk due to bacteria present in bear saliva, necessitating immediate antibiotic treatment. Dr. Harper decided that Carl's arm fracture required immediate surgical repair to prevent permanent disability. The compound fracture had damaged both bones in his forearm, as well as several tendons and blood vessels, and the delay in treatment due to the remote location of the attack had increased the complexity of the repair work needed. Carl was taken into surgery at 2:15 p.m., still asking about Rex, despite the anesthesia medications that were being administered. Dr. Harper and her surgical team worked for 3 hours to repair the damage to his arm, using metal plates and screws to stabilize the fractures and suturing torn muscles and tendons back together. Meanwhile, back at the attack site, a team of Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks officers, led by Regional Supervisor James "Jim" McKenna, had arrived to investigate the incident and determine what actions needed to be taken regarding the bear. McKenna was a 30-year veteran of wildlife management who had dealt with dozens of bear encounters over his career, including several fatal attacks. The investigation team included wildlife biologist Dr. Amanda Foster, who specialized in grizzly bear behavior and had conducted extensive research on human-bear interactions in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Dr. Foster was 35 years old, held a PhD in wildlife biology from the University of Montana, and had personally studied more than 200 individual grizzly bears during her career. The scene of the attack told a clear story to the experienced investigators. The massive paw prints, claw marks on trees, and blood evidence indicated that a large male grizzly had encountered the fleeing suspect and pursued him toward the location where law enforcement officers were conducting their tracking operation. The bear's behavior appeared to be defensive rather than predatory, suggesting that it had been surprised or startled by the human presence in its territory. This bear was protecting its space, Dr. Foster explained to McKenna as they examined the physical evidence. The claw marks on the trees and the scent markings indicate this is an established territory, probably a mature male that's been using this area for several years. Rex's body was carefully examined and photographed as part of the investigation. The German Shepherd's injuries were consistent with an attack by a large grizzly bear, and his defensive wounds suggested that he had died attempting to protect his human partner. Rex's courage and loyalty in the face of overwhelming danger had likely saved Carl's life by providing enough distraction for the bear spray to take effect and the bear to eventually withdraw. McKenna faced a difficult decision regarding the bear's fate. Montana state policy required that bears involved in attacks on humans be either relocated or destroyed, depending on the circumstances of the encounter. However, this particular incident had occurred deep in established bear habitat, and the animal's behavior appeared to be defensive rather than aggressive. We need to consider that this bear was essentially defending its territory against multiple intruders, McKenna told Dr. Foster. The suspect, the dog, and the officers all represented threats that appeared suddenly in an area the bear considered its home range. The decision was complicated by the fact that Derek Mallinson remained at large somewhere in the forest. Additional law enforcement teams were being organized to continue the search, but the presence of an aggressive grizzly bear in the area made such operations extremely dangerous for personnel on the ground. Carl's surgery was successful, but Dr. Harper warned that he faced months of rehabilitation and might never regain full use of his left arm. The damage to tendons and nerves was extensive, and some loss of strength and mobility was inevitable, despite the best surgical repair techniques. When Carl woke up in the recovery room at 6:30 p.m., his first question was about Rex. The nursing staff had been prepared for this moment, knowing that the loss of his K9 partner would be as traumatic for the officer as his physical injuries. "I'm sorry, Carl," said nurse supervisor Janet Morrison, a 20-year veteran of trauma care who had experience dealing with law enforcement injuries. "Rex didn't make it. He fought very hard to protect you, but his injuries were too severe." Carl's reaction to the news was immediate and devastating. Despite the pain medications and his weakened condition, he became extremely agitated and had to be sedated to prevent him from injuring himself further. The emotional trauma of losing Rex was compounding his physical recovery and would require specialized counseling support. News of the bear attack spread rapidly through the law enforcement community and local media. Officer Carl Stevens and K9 Rex were well known in the Kalispell area, having participated in numerous successful operations and community outreach programs. Rex had been a favorite with local school children during safety demonstrations, and his death generated an outpouring of sympathy from the community. Detective Sergeant Bobby Martinez organized a briefing for media representatives at 8 p.m. to provide official information about the incident while protecting the ongoing investigation and Carl's privacy. Martinez had worked with both Carl and Rex on numerous occasions and was personally affected by the loss of the K9 officer. Officer Stevens and K9 Rex were conducting a lawful pursuit of a dangerous suspect when they encountered a grizzly bear in its natural habitat, Martinez explained to the assembled reporters. Rex gave his life protecting his partner, displaying the kind of courage and loyalty that exemplifies the best qualities of police service dogs. The search for Derek Mallinson was suspended at nightfall due to safety concerns about operating in bear territory during darkness. Additional resources would be brought in the following day, including helicopter support and teams of officers equipped with specialized gear for wilderness operations. Dr. Foster remained at the attack site until darkness fell, collecting additional evidence and monitoring for any signs of the bear's continued presence in the area. Her analysis suggested that the grizzly had withdrawn to a distance of at least several miles, but bears were capable of traveling vast distances in a single day and could return to the area at any time. Grizzly bears have excellent long-term memory, Dr. Foster explained to McKenna. This animal will remember this location and the associated stress for years to come. Any future human activity in this area needs to take that into account. The investigation team established trail cameras and motion sensors throughout the area to monitor bear activity and gather additional information about the animal's behavior patterns. The data collected would be crucial in determining whether the bear posed an ongoing threat to humans or could be allowed to remain in its natural habitat. Carl spent his first night in the hospital heavily sedated, but his sleep was troubled by nightmares about the attack and his failure to save Rex. The psychological trauma of the incident was manifesting itself in classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, including flashbacks, anxiety, and severe depression. Dr. Patricia Kellner, the hospital's staff psychologist, met with Carl the following morning to begin assessing his mental health needs. Dr. Kellner specialized in treating first responders who had experienced traumatic events, and she recognized that Carl's emotional recovery would be just as important as his physical healing. Losing a K9 partner is uniquely traumatic for law enforcement officers, Dr. Kellner explained to Carl's wife, Michelle, who had driven from their home in Whitefish as soon as she received word of the attack. The bond between handler and dog is unlike any other relationship in police work, and the grief process can be very complex. Michelle Stevens was 31 years old, worked as an elementary school teacher, and had been married to Carl for 5 years. She had watched her husband develop his close relationship with Rex and understood how devastating the dog's death would be for Carl's emotional well-being. Rex wasn't just his work partner, Michelle told Dr. Kellner. Carl brought him home every night, and he was part of our family. This is going to be incredibly hard for him to process. The second day after the attack brought renewed search efforts for Derek Mallinson, who remained missing somewhere in the vast wilderness areas surrounding the attack site. A helicopter equipped with thermal imaging technology began systematic searches of the forest, while ground teams worked to establish a perimeter around the most likely escape routes. Search coordinator Captain Lisa Anderson had 25 years of experience in wilderness operations and understood the challenges of locating a single individual in such terrain. The area they were searching encompassed more than 50 square miles of dense forest, steep ravines, and rocky outcroppings that provided countless hiding places. "We are dealing with someone who has demonstrated survival skills and familiarity with the outdoors," Anderson explained to her team leaders. "He's also armed and dangerous, and there's still a grizzly bear somewhere in the area that has shown aggressive behavior toward humans." The bear's presence continued to complicate all search and rescue operations. Personnel on the ground were required to work in groups, carry bear spray and noise-making devices, and maintain constant communication with helicopter support. The risk of additional bear encounters was considered high, particularly given the animal's apparent territorial behavior. Dr. Foster continued her analysis of the bear's behavior and concluded that the animal was likely a mature male that had established the attack site as part of its core territory. Such bears were known to be particularly aggressive in defending their space, especially during the spring season when they were emerging from hibernation and reasserting dominance over their ranges. This bear's behavior was entirely predictable given the circumstances, Dr. Foster explained to the incident command team. Multiple humans entered its territory suddenly and without warning. One of them was running and exhibiting prey-like behavior, and the bear responded according to its instincts. Carl's physical recovery progressed slowly but steadily. The surgical repair of his arm was healing well, though he would require extensive physical therapy to regain function. His other injuries were also responding to treatment, but the psychological trauma continued to dominate his condition. "He's not sleeping well, he's having flashbacks during the day, and he becomes extremely agitated whenever anyone mentions the incident," Dr. Kellner reported to his medical team. "This is a textbook case of acute stress reaction that could develop into long-term PTSD if not treated aggressively." The psychological impact of losing Rex was compounded by Carl's guilt over his perceived failure to protect his partner. Despite repeated explanations that his actions had been appropriate and that Rex's death was unavoidable, Carl continued to blame himself for the dog's fate. On the third day after the attack, the search for Derek Mallinson took a dramatic turn when thermal imaging from the helicopter detected what appeared to be a human heat signature in a rocky area approximately 6 miles from the original attack site. Ground teams were immediately dispatched to investigate, but they approached with extreme caution due to the suspect's history of violence and the possibility of bear activity in the area. The search team was led by Sergeant Mike Crawford, a 15-year veteran with extensive SWAT training and wilderness experience. Crawford's team included 4 officers equipped with rifles, bear spray, and communication equipment that would allow them to coordinate with helicopter support if needed. When they reached the location indicated by the thermal imaging, they found evidence of recent human presence, a small cave-like depression in the rocks that showed signs of being used as a temporary shelter. Food wrappers, human waste, and fabric that appeared to have been torn from clothing were scattered around the area. "He's definitely been here," and recently, Crawford radioed to the command post. "Looks like he spent at least one night in this location, maybe two." More disturbing was the discovery of additional blood evidence that suggested Mallinson's injuries from the bear encounter were more serious than initially believed. The amount of blood found at the shelter site indicated ongoing bleeding that could be life-threatening if not treated. "We might be looking for a body at this point," Crawford told Captain Anderson. "If he's been bleeding like this for 3 days without medical attention, he could be in serious trouble." The search was expanded to include areas where an injured person might seek water or additional shelter. Wounded animals and humans alike were drawn to water sources, and the terrain included several small streams and springs that could attract someone in Mallinson's condition. Meanwhile, Dr. Foster had been analyzing data from the trail cameras and motion sensors placed around the original attack site. The equipment had recorded several instances of bear activity, confirming that the grizzly was continuing to use the area and might pose an ongoing threat to search personnel. "The bear has returned to the attack site at least twice since the incident," Dr. Foster reported. "This behavior suggests that it considers this area core territory and will defend it against future intrusions." The continued presence of the bear forced search teams to modify their tactics and avoid certain areas entirely. The animal's behavior patterns indicated that it was most active during early morning and late evening hours, so search operations were concentrated during midday periods when encounters were less likely. On the 4th day, Carl was strong enough to receive visitors other than his immediate family. Detective Sergeant Martinez came to the hospital to brief him on the search for Mallinson and to discuss the incident for official reporting purposes. "I know this is difficult, Carl, but we need to understand exactly what happened out there," Martinez explained. "Your observations about the bear's behavior and Mallinson's condition could be crucial for the ongoing search." Carl's recollection of the attack was fragmented and confused, partly due to the trauma and partly because of the medications he was receiving. However, he was able to provide important details about Mallinson's apparent injuries and his direction of travel after the bear attack. "He was definitely hurt before we ever saw him," Carl told Martinez. "There was blood on his clothes, and he was moving like someone with injuries to his left side." This information supported the theory that Mallinson had been injured during his initial encounter with the bear and was likely in serious medical distress. The search teams adjusted their focus to areas where an injured person might seek shelter or medical assistance. Carl also provided crucial details about Rex's final moments that would be important for the official incident report and the posthumous awards that the department was considering for the fallen K-9 officer. "Rex knew that Bear was going to kill me," Carl told Martinez through tears. "He didn't hesitate for even a second. He went straight at that bear knowing he couldn't win, just to give me a chance." The conversation was emotionally difficult for both men, as Martinez had worked closely with both Carl and Rex on numerous occasions. The loss of a K-9 officer affected the entire department, as these dogs were considered full members of the law enforcement team. "Rex died a hero," Martinez told Carl. "His actions saved your life, and that's how he'll be remembered." The search for Derek Mallinson entered its 5th day with no significant new developments. The helicopter crews had covered hundreds of square miles of terrain, and ground teams had investigated dozens of potential hiding places without success. Weather conditions were beginning to deteriorate, with forecasts calling for heavy rain and possible snow at higher elevations. "We're reaching the point where this becomes a recovery operation rather than a rescue," Captain Anderson admitted during the daily briefing. "If Mallinson is alive and mobile, he could be anywhere within a 100-mile radius by now." The possibility that Mallinson had died from his injuries was becoming increasingly likely. The blood evidence, combined with the harsh conditions and his lack of proper outdoor equipment, suggested that survival beyond the first few days would be extremely difficult. Dr. Foster's analysis of the bear's behavior indicated that the animal was likely to remain in its established territory unless forcibly relocated. This created ongoing safety concerns for future outdoor recreation activities in the area, though the remote location meant that casual hikers were unlikely to encounter the bear. This bear has now had a significant negative interaction with humans, Dr. Foster explained. That doesn't necessarily make it more dangerous, but it does mean that any future encounters need to be managed very carefully. Carl's physical recovery continued to progress, though complications from one of his wounds required additional surgery to prevent infection. The delay in treatment due to the remote location of the attack had allowed bacteria from the bear's mouth to establish itself in the deep puncture wounds, creating an infection risk that required aggressive antibiotic treatment. The psychological trauma remained the most challenging aspect of Carl's recovery. He was experiencing severe depression, anxiety, and intrusive thoughts about the attack that interfered with his ability to sleep or concentrate. Dr. Kellner recommended that he be transferred to a specialized treatment facility that dealt specifically with trauma-related mental health issues. Officer Stevens is dealing with what we call complex trauma, Dr. Kellner explained to Michelle. He's not only processing his own near-death experience, but also the loss of his partner and feelings of responsibility for Rex's death. This type of trauma requires intensive, specialized treatment. The recommendation created additional stress for Carl and his family, as it would mean transferring him to a facility in Billings, approximately 350 miles from Kalispell. However, the specialized treatment available there could make the difference between full recovery and long-term disability. On the 6th day after the attack, the search for Derek Mallinson was officially changed from a rescue operation to a recovery mission. The chances of finding him alive after nearly a week in the wilderness with serious injuries were considered negligible, and resources were being redirected to other priority cases. "We'll continue monitoring the area and investigating any reports of sightings," Captain Anderson announced, "but active search operations are being suspended pending new information." The decision was controversial, as some community members felt that more should be done to locate Mallinson regardless of his criminal history. However, the costs and risks associated with continuing the search could not be justified given the low probability of success. Carl was informed of the decision during his meeting with Detective Sergeant Martinez, and his reaction was complex. While he understood the practical considerations that led to suspending the search, he also felt that Mallinson's fate was somehow connected to his own survival and Rex's death. "I keep thinking that if we'd done something different, Rex would still be alive and that guy would be in custody," Carl told Dr. Kellner during one of their sessions. "It feels like Rex died for nothing." Dr. Kellner recognized this type of survivor guilt as a common component of trauma reactions among first responders. Carl's need to find meaning and purpose in the tragic events was natural, but it was also preventing him from processing his grief in a healthy way. "Rex didn't die for nothing," Dr. Kellner explained. "He died protecting you, which was his job and his nature. The fact that Mallinson escaped doesn't diminish the value of Rex's sacrifice or the importance of what you both were trying to do." The community's response to Rex's death continued to grow, with donations pouring in for a memorial fund and requests for information about funeral arrangements. K-9 officers from departments across Montana and neighboring states expressed interest in attending a memorial service, reflecting the strong bonds that existed within the law enforcement community. Carl's wife, Michelle, worked with the department to plan a memorial service that would honor Rex's service while respecting Carl's need for privacy during his recovery. The challenge was balancing the community's desire to pay their respects with Carl's fragile emotional state. "Carl wants to honor Rex, But he's not ready for a big public ceremony, Michelle explained to Martinez. We need to find a way to let people show their support without overwhelming him. The solution was to hold two separate events, a small private service for Carl, his family, and his closest colleagues, followed by a larger public memorial where community members could pay their respects. This approach would allow Carl to participate in honoring his partner without subjecting him to the stress of a large public gathering. The private service was held at the veterinary clinic where Rex had received his routine medical care throughout his career. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, the veterinarian who had treated Rex since he was a puppy, spoke about the dog's intelligence, loyalty, and gentle nature when he wasn't working. Rex was one of the most remarkable dogs I've ever worked with, Dr. Hendricks told the small gathering. He had this ability to switch from being a fierce working dog to a gentle companion, depending on what the situation required. Carl attended the service in a wheelchair, still recovering from his surgeries and barely able to speak through his grief. The sight of Rex's collar and harness, along with photos from his training and working career, brought fresh waves of emotion that threatened to overwhelm his fragile mental state. The larger public memorial was held 3 days later at the Flathead County Sheriff's Department headquarters. More than 200 people attended, including law enforcement officers, community members, and children from schools where Rex had participated in safety programs. A memorial garden was announced during the service, to be established at the law enforcement training facility where Rex had learned his skills. The garden would include a bronze statue of Rex and would serve as a permanent reminder of his service and sacrifice. Carl was unable to attend the public memorial, but he watched a video recording of the event from his hospital room. The outpouring of support from the community was both comforting and overwhelming, reinforcing the impact that Rex had made during his short career. 2 weeks after the attack, Carl was transferred to the specialized trauma treatment facility in Billings. The move was emotionally difficult, as it meant leaving the familiar surroundings of Kalispell and the support system he had built there. The facility, known as the Montana First Responder Recovery Center, was specifically designed to treat law enforcement officers, firefighters, and emergency medical personnel who had experienced traumatic events. The staff understood the unique challenges faced by first responders and had developed specialized treatment protocols for their needs. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, the facility's director, met with Carl during his first day to assess his condition and develop a treatment plan. Dr. Rodriguez was a former police officer himself who had transitioned to psychology after experiencing his own trauma-related mental health challenges. "We understand what you're going through because we've been there ourselves," Dr. Rodriguez told Carl. "The bond between a K-9 officer and his dog is something that civilians often don't fully comprehend, but everyone here gets it." The treatment program included individual therapy, group sessions with other first responders who had experienced similar losses, and specialized therapy techniques designed to help process traumatic memories. Carl would also work with occupational therapists to regain full function in his injured arm. Meanwhile, the investigation into the bear attack continued under the direction of Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. Dr. Foster's research had identified the specific bear involved in the incident through analysis of hair samples and paw print measurements, and the animal had been designated as Bear B47 in the state's tracking system. Bear B47 was estimated to be approximately 12 years old and weighed between 550 and 600 pounds based on the size of his tracks and claw marks. DNA analysis of hair samples indicated that he was not related to any bears that had previously been involved in human conflicts, suggesting that this was his first aggressive encounter with people. This bear's behavior was defensive rather than predatory, Dr. Foster concluded in her official report. The incident occurred in established bear habitat, and the animal was responding to what it perceived as multiple threats entering its territory simultaneously. The decision was made to allow bear B47 to remain in his natural habitat rather than relocating or destroying him. However, the area around the attack site was designated as a high-risk zone, and additional warning signs were posted at trail access points to alert hikers and outdoor enthusiasts about the bear's presence. Bears like B47 are an important part of the ecosystem, Dr. Foster explained to reporters. As long as he remains in remote areas and doesn't seek out human contact, he poses no significant threat to public safety. The decision was not universally popular, particularly among some law enforcement personnel who felt that any bear involved in attacking officers should be destroyed. However, wildlife officials stood by their assessment that the bear's behavior had been defensive and that destroying it would not serve any conservation or public safety purpose. Carl's treatment at the Billings facility proved to be more challenging than anyone had anticipated. His trauma was compounded by multiple factors: the physical pain from his injuries, the grief over losing Rex, guilt over his perceived failure to protect his partner, and anxiety about his future career in law enforcement. Carl is dealing with what we call complicated grief, Dr. Rodriguez explained to Michelle during one of her visits. He's not just mourning the loss of Rex, but also processing his own mortality and questioning his identity as a police officer. The group therapy sessions were particularly difficult for Carl, as hearing about other officers' traumatic experiences sometimes triggered his own memories of the attack. However, the connections he made with other first responders who had experienced similar losses provided a support system that he couldn't find anywhere else. One of Carl's fellow patients was Detective Linda Morrison from Great Falls, who had lost her K-9 partner in a shooting incident 6 months earlier. Linda's experience with the grief process and her insights into the unique challenges of losing a working dog partner proved invaluable to Carl's recovery. The guilt never completely goes away, Linda told Carl during one of their conversations. But you learn to understand that our dogs know the risks just like we do, and they choose to do the job anyway because they love us and want to protect us. The physical therapy component of Carl's treatment focused on regaining full use of his left arm and hand. The bear's bite had damaged several tendons and nerves, creating weakness and numbness that affected his ability to grip objects and perform fine motor tasks. Physical therapist Janet Kim worked with Carl daily to rebuild strength and flexibility in his injured arm. The exercises were often painful and frustrating, particularly when Carl's progress seemed slower than expected. Recovery from this type of injury is measured in months, not weeks, Janet explained. The important thing is that you're making steady progress, even if it doesn't always feel that way. The question of whether Carl would be able to return to active police duty remained unanswered. His physical injuries were healing, but the department's fitness for duty evaluations would need to assess both his physical capabilities and his psychological readiness to handle the stresses of law enforcement work. 3 weeks into his treatment at the Billings facility, Carl received unexpected news about the search for Derek Mallinson. Hunters in an area approximately 20 miles from the original attack site had discovered human remains that appeared to match Mallinson's description. The remains were found in a remote ravine where Mallinson had apparently fallen while attempting to cross a steep section of terrain. The body showed evidence of significant injuries consistent with a bear attack, as well as additional trauma from the fall that had likely been fatal. It looks like he survived the bear encounter but died from injuries sustained in the fall, Detective Sergeant Martinez explained to Carl during a phone call. The medical examiner estimates that death occurred within 24 to 48 hours of the original incident. The news brought Carl a complex mixture of emotions. On one hand, it provided closure to the case and confirmed that his and Rex's efforts had not been entirely in vain. Mallinson had been prevented from committing additional crimes. On the other hand, it reinforced his guilt over Rex's death, as the suspect they had been pursuing was apparently doomed anyway. "I keep thinking that if we had approached the situation differently, Rex might still be alive and the outcome would have been the same," Carl told Dr. Rodriguez during their next session. Dr. Rodriguez recognized this type of reasoning as a common component of trauma-related guilt, where survivors create alternative scenarios that might have prevented the tragic outcome. The therapeutic challenge was helping Carl understand that such speculation was both unprovable and counterproductive to his recovery. "You and Rex responded appropriately to the situation as it developed," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "The presence of the bear was an unpredictable factor that no one could have anticipated or prepared for. The discovery of Mallinson's remains also had implications for the bear involved in the incident. With confirmation that the suspect had died from injuries sustained during his flight through the wilderness, there was additional support for the decision to leave Bear B47 in his natural habitat. Dr. Foster's final report on the incident concluded that the bear's behavior had been entirely defensive and that the animal posed no ongoing threat to public safety as long as appropriate precautions were taken by people entering his territory. This incident illustrates the importance of understanding bear behavior and respecting their habitat, Dr. Foster wrote. Human activities in bear country always carry inherent risks, and this case demonstrates what can happen when those risks are not properly managed. Carl's progress in therapy was slow but steady. The individual counseling sessions helped him process his trauma and develop coping strategies for dealing with flashbacks and anxiety. The group sessions provided peer support from other first responders who understood the unique challenges he was facing. However, the question of returning to police work remained unresolved. Carl's physical injuries were healing well enough that he would likely regain most of the function in his left arm, but his psychological readiness for active duty was still uncertain. "I don't know if I can handle having another K9 partner," Carl admitted to Dr. Rodriguez. "The thought of putting another dog at risk like I did with Rex is terrifying." This concern was central to Carl's recovery process, as his identity as a police officer had been closely tied to his role as a K9 handler. The possibility of continuing his career without a dog partner represented a fundamental change in how he viewed himself and his work. The Flathead County Sheriff's Department was supportive of Carl's recovery, but also needed to plan for the future of their K9 program. Rex had been one of only 3 police dogs in the department, and his loss represented a significant reduction in their capabilities. Detective Sergeant Martinez began the process of identifying and training a replacement dog, but the timeline for such training was measured in months. Finding the right animal, providing specialized training, and integrating a new dog into the department's operations would take at least 6 months under optimal conditions. The memorial garden for Rex was completed 6 weeks after the attack, providing a permanent tribute to his service and sacrifice. The bronze statue depicted Rex in his working harness, alert and ready for action, capturing the essence of his dedication to protecting and serving. Carl attended the dedication ceremony for the Memorial Garden, his first public appearance since the attack. The event was kept small and private, with only department personnel and Carl's immediate family in attendance. Standing before the statue of his fallen partner, Carl finally found words to express his feelings about Rex's sacrifice. "Rex did what he was trained to do and what he was born to do," Carl said to the small gathering. "He protected his partner and gave his life doing the job he loved. I can't ask for a better legacy than that." The dedication ceremony marked a turning point in Carl's emotional recovery. While he still struggled with guilt and trauma-related symptoms, he was beginning to accept that Rex's death had meaning and purpose beyond the tragic circumstances of the bear attack. Dr. Rodriguez noted significant improvement in Carl's mental state following the memorial ceremony. Honoring Rex's memory in a tangible way has helped Carl begin to process his grief in a healthier manner, the doctor reported. He's starting to focus on the positive aspects of their partnership rather than dwelling exclusively on its tragic end. The question of Carl's return to active duty was addressed during a fitness for duty evaluation conducted 8 weeks after the attack. The evaluation included both physical and psychological components, with input from his medical team, therapists, and department supervisors. Dr. Harper, who had performed Carl's initial surgery, cleared him for limited duty with restrictions on physical activities that might stress his healing arm. The psychological evaluation was more complex, requiring assessment of his ability to handle the stresses and dangers of police work. Dr. Rodriguez recommended that Carl be allowed to return to work in a limited capacity, with ongoing counseling and regular evaluations to monitor his adjustment. However, he also recommended that Carl not be assigned to K-9 duties until he had fully processed his trauma and demonstrated readiness for that specific responsibility. Officer Stevens has made significant progress in his recovery, but the loss of a K-9 partner creates unique challenges that require additional time and specialized support, Dr. Rodriguez wrote in his evaluation. The department accepted the recommendation and offered Carl a position in the detective division, where his experience and skills could be valuable while allowing him to avoid the trigger situations that might worsen his trauma symptoms. Carl accepted the new assignment with mixed emotions. While he was grateful to continue his law enforcement career, the change from patrol work to detective duties represented another loss, the end of his identity as a K-9 officer and the daily work he had loved. "It's not the career I planned, but it's still police work," Carl told Michelle as they discussed the offer. "Maybe this is what I'm supposed to do now." The transition to detective work proved to be more positive than Carl had anticipated. His experience in patrol operations and his attention to detail made him effective at investigating cases, and the indoor work environment reduced his exposure to situations that might trigger trauma responses. However, Carl continued to struggle with certain aspects of his new role. Cases involving violence or situations where backup officers were required sometimes triggered flashbacks to the bear attack, requiring him to excuse himself and use the coping techniques he had learned in therapy. 3 months after the attack, the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Department released its final report on the incident. The report concluded that Bear B-47 had acted defensively when confronted with multiple humans in his territory, and that his behavior was consistent with normal grizzly bear responses to perceived threats. The report also included recommendations for future law enforcement operations in bear country, including mandatory bear awareness training for officers, requirements for bear spray and noise-making devices, and protocols for coordinating with wildlife officials when operations were planned in known bear habitat. This incident could have been prevented through better awareness of bear behavior and appropriate precautions, the report stated. While the outcome was tragic, it provides valuable lessons for future operations in similar environments. Carl read the report with interest, but also with renewed grief over Rex's death. The suggestion that the incident could have been prevented reinforced his guilt, despite the therapeutic work he had done to address those feelings. Dr. Rodriguez, who continued to work with Carl on an outpatient basis, helped him understand that the report's recommendations were based on hindsight and knowledge that wasn't available at the time of the incident. You and your team made decisions based on the information and training you had, Dr. Rodriguez explained. The fact that additional precautions might have prevented the attack doesn't mean that you were negligent or at fault. The broader law enforcement community also learned from the incident, with departments across Montana and other western states implementing new protocols for operations in bear country. Rex's death, while tragic, contributed to improved safety procedures that could prevent similar incidents in the future. Carl found some comfort in knowing that Rex's sacrifice had led to positive changes that would protect other officers and their K9 partners. If Rex's death helps keep other dogs safe, then maybe it wasn't completely in vain, he told Michelle. 6 months after the attack, Carl had established a new routine in his detective role and was functioning well in most aspects of his work. His physical injuries had healed to the point where he had regained about 80% of the strength and mobility in his left arm, which was sufficient for his current duties. The psychological trauma continued to affect him, but the symptoms were manageable with ongoing therapy and medication. He still experienced occasional flashbacks and anxiety, particularly when exposed to certain triggers, but these episodes were less frequent and less severe than in the immediate aftermath of the attack. Carl's marriage to Michelle had been strengthened by their shared experience of trauma and recovery. Michelle had learned to recognize the signs of Carl's difficult days and had developed her own coping strategies for supporting him while maintaining her own emotional health. "We're different people than we were before this happened," Michelle reflected during a counseling session they attended together. "The experience changed us, but I think we're stronger as a couple because of how we went through it together." The question of whether Carl would ever work with another K9 partner remained unresolved. The department had acquired and trained a new dog, a Belgian Malinois named Thor, but Carl had not expressed any interest in returning to K9 duties. "I'm not ready for that yet," Carl told Martinez when the topic was raised. "Maybe someday, but right now I can't imagine putting another dog in danger." Martinez understood Carl's reluctance and assured him that there was no pressure to return to K9 work. The department valued his contributions as a detective and was committed to supporting whatever career path he chose. The Memorial Garden for Rex had become a place of pilgrimage for law enforcement officers from across the region. K9 handlers in particular found meaning in visiting the site and paying their respects to a dog who had died protecting his partner. Carl visited the memorial regularly, often bringing flowers or spending quiet time reflecting on his memories of Rex. These visits were therapeutic for him, providing a way to maintain his connection to his fallen partner while processing his grief. "I tell him about my cases and what's happening in my life," Carl explained to Dr. Rodriguez. "It sounds crazy, but I feel like he's still with me in some way." Dr. Rodriguez assured Carl that maintaining such connections with deceased loved ones was a normal and healthy part of the grief process. "Rex was an important part of your life for years," the doctor explained. "It's natural that you would want to maintain that relationship in whatever way feels meaningful to you." 1 year after the attack, Carl participated in the first annual Rex Memorial Run, a fundraising event organized by the community to support the police K9 program. The event raised money for equipment, training, and veterinary care for working dogs throughout the region. Carl's participation in the run was both physically and emotionally challenging. His injured arm still caused him some discomfort during extended physical activity, and being surrounded by working K9 teams brought back powerful memories of his partnership with Rex. However, the event also provided Carl with a sense of purpose and connection to the law enforcement community. Seeing the support from community members and fellow officers reinforced his belief that Rex's sacrifice had meaning beyond the tragic circumstances of his death. "Rex would have loved this," Carl told the crowd gathered for the event. He always enjoyed being around people, especially kids, and he would have been proud to know that his memory is helping other working dogs. The success of the memorial run led to plans for making it an annual event, with proceeds supporting K9 programs throughout Montana. The event would ensure that Rex's legacy continued to benefit working dogs and their handlers for years to come. As Carl approached the second anniversary of the attack, he had achieved a level of stability and acceptance that had seemed impossible in the immediate aftermath of the incident. His work as a detective was fulfilling, his marriage was strong, and his trauma symptoms were well managed through ongoing therapy and support. The question of working with another K9 partner remained open. Carl had begun to express some interest in the possibility, though he was clear that any such decision would need to be carefully considered and properly supported. "I'm not the same person I was when I worked with Rex," Carl told Dr. Rodriguez. "If I ever do work with another dog, it will have to be different. I understand the risks now in a way I didn't before." Dr. Rodriguez encouraged Carl to continue exploring his feelings about K9 work while avoiding any pressure to make decisions before he was ready. The healing process couldn't be rushed, and Carl's readiness would ultimately determine the right timing for any major changes. Bear greater than B47 continued to live in his territory, with no additional incidents involving humans reported. The warning signs and education efforts had successfully prevented other dangerous encounters, validating the decision to leave the bear in his natural habitat. Dr. Foster's ongoing research on human-bear interactions had been informed by the incident, leading to improved understanding of how bears respond to multiple human intrusions in their territory. Her work contributed to better safety protocols for law enforcement and wildlife management operations in bear country. The tragedy of Officer Stevens and Rex has provided valuable insights that are helping us prevent similar incidents, Dr. Foster reported. Their sacrifice has contributed to improved safety for both humans and bears in shared habitats. Carl took some comfort in knowing that the painful experience he and Rex had endured was contributing to scientific knowledge that could prevent future tragedies. While nothing could bring Rex back, their story was helping to protect other officers and their K9 partners. As the second anniversary of the attack approached, Carl made a decision that surprised many of his colleagues and family members. He requested to meet with Thor, the Belgian Malinois that had replaced Rex in the department's K9 program. The meeting was arranged carefully, with Dr. Rodriguez and other members of Carl's support team present to monitor his emotional response. Carl was nervous about the encounter, unsure how he would react to working with another police dog. Thor was younger and more energetic than Rex had been, with a different personality and working style. However, Carl found himself drawn to the dog's intelligence and eagerness to please, qualities that reminded him of the positive aspects of his partnership with Rex. "He's not Rex, and he never will be," Carl told Michelle after the meeting. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's time to start thinking about a new partnership rather than trying to replace what I lost." The meeting marked the beginning of a gradual process of reintegration with K9 work. Carl began attending training sessions as an observer, helping with administrative aspects of the K9 program and slowly rebuilding his comfort level with working dogs. Dr. Rodriguez supported this gradual approach, emphasizing that Carl should proceed at his own pace without external pressure. "Recovery isn't about returning to exactly what you were before," the doctor explained. "It's about finding a new way forward that incorporates what you've learned from your experience." 6 months later, Carl officially requested to return to K9 duties, this time with Thor as his partner. The transition was carefully managed, with extensive retraining, ongoing counseling support, and regular evaluations to ensure that Carl was handling the responsibility appropriately. The partnership between Carl and Thor developed differently than his relationship with Rex had. Carl was more cautious, more aware of potential dangers, and more protective of his new partner. However, these changes made him a better handler in many ways, as his increased awareness and caution improved their safety and effectiveness. Carl brings a level of experience and wisdom to K9 work that he didn't have before, observed Sergeant Morrison, who supervised the K9 program. The tragedy he experienced has made him more thoughtful about risk management and officer safety. 3 years after the bear attack that killed Rex and nearly ended Carl's career, he had achieved a level of recovery and adaptation that exceeded everyone's expectations. His work with Thor was highly effective, his trauma symptoms were minimal and manageable, and his marriage to Michelle was stronger than ever. The annual Rex Memorial Run had grown into a major community event, raising thousands of dollars each year for K9 programs throughout the region. Carl's participation in the event had evolved from a painful remembrance to a celebration of Rex's legacy and the continued importance of working dogs in law enforcement. Carl often spoke to groups about his experience, sharing lessons learned about trauma recovery, the importance of mental health support for first responders, and the special bond between handlers and their K9 partners. His willingness to discuss his struggles openly helped reduce stigma around psychological trauma in law enforcement. "I want other officers to know that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness," Carl would tell audiences. "Rex died protecting me, and I owe it to his memory to be the best officer and person I can be. That includes taking care of my mental health." Adi, the bear that had changed so many lives, Bear B47, continued to live peacefully in his mountain territory. Wildlife cameras occasionally captured images of the massive grizzly, confirming that he remained healthy and was avoiding human contact. His story had become part of the education programs used to teach people about bear safety and coexistence. Dr. Foster's research, informed partly by the incident involving Carl and Rex, had led to improved protocols for wildlife management and public safety in bear country. The tragedy had contributed to scientific knowledge that was helping prevent similar incidents across North America. "Every wildlife encounter teaches us something," Dr. Foster reflected. "The loss of Rex was heartbreaking, but the knowledge gained from studying that incident has helped protect countless other humans and animals." As Carl patrolled the forests around Kalispell with Thor, he carried with him the memory of Rex and the lessons learned from their tragic encounter with Bear B47. The experience had changed him fundamentally, but it had also made him a better officer, a better husband, and a better person. The wilderness that had taken Rex's life continued to be both beautiful and dangerous, requiring constant respect and awareness from those who worked in its depths. Carl's experience served as a reminder that nature could not be controlled or predicted, only understood and respected. Rex's legacy lived on not only in the Memorial Garden and annual fundraising run, but in the improved safety protocols, enhanced training programs, and greater awareness of psychological trauma that had resulted from his sacrifice. The German Shepherd's courage and loyalty had saved Carl's life, but his death had also saved the lives of others who would benefit from the lessons learned from that terrible day in the Montana wilderness. In quiet moments, Carl would remember Rex's final act of heroism, the way the dog had charged fearlessly at an opponent he could not defeat, motivated only by love and loyalty to his human partner. It was a lesson in courage, duty, and sacrifice that would guide Carl for the rest of his life. The forest where Rex died remained a place of beauty and danger, where the ancient rhythms of nature continued unchanged by human tragedy. Bear greater than B47 still roamed his territory, following the instincts that had shaped his species for thousands of years. The encounter that had brought so much pain had been, from the bear's perspective, simply a defense of his home against unexpected intruders. Carl's understanding of that perspective had grown over the years, helped by his conversations with Dr. Foster and his own reflection on the incident. The bear had not been evil or malicious, but simply acting according to his nature. That understanding had helped Carl process his anger and find a form of peace with what had happened. As the sun set over the Cabinet Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Rex would have loved, Carl finished his shift and headed home to Michelle and the life they had rebuilt together. Thor rode beside him in the specially designed K9 compartment, alert and ready for whatever challenges might come. The partnership between Carl and Thor would never replace what he had shared with Rex, but it honored that memory by continuing the important work of protecting and serving the community. Rex's courage lived on in every successful operation, every rescued hiker, and every criminal apprehended through the skills and dedication of working K9 teams. The Memorial Garden remained a place of pilgrimage for those who understood the special bond between handlers and their dogs. Fresh flowers appeared regularly at the base of Rex's statue, left by officers, community members, and visitors who were moved by the story of a dog who had given everything to protect his partner. In the end, Rex's story became more than just a tragedy. It became a testament to the power of love, loyalty, and sacrifice that defined the best aspects of the relationship between humans and the animals who chose to serve alongside them. His memory would continue to inspire and guide future generations of K9 officers and their partners, ensuring that his legacy would live on long after the pain of his loss had faded. The wilderness called, as it always would, with its promise of beauty and its threat of danger. But those who answered that call were better prepared, better trained, and better supported because of the lessons learned from one German shepherd's ultimate sacrifice in the forests of Montana. Rex's death had meaning, his courage had purpose, and his love had created a legacy that would endure as long as there were officers willing to serve and dogs brave enough to stand beside them.